A warmer friendly hello, welcome to lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. We've got an excellent podcast for you. As coming up in segment number 2, we're going to be chatting with our good friend Rocco Miller, who does such an incredible job over at Bracketeer.org. We're going to be chatting with him about what we've all seen here in the first few weeks of the season. He does a great job with the mid-major show over at the Field of 68, so take a look at some of those mid-major teams that have really been able to impress, and some of the ones looking at you, loyal Chicago, that have not been able to impress thus far this season. Then additionally, we're going to take a look at some of the big tournaments that we've got coming up, how much/little he makes out of some of these multi-team events, and what we're going to be seeing out there, as well as we sometimes get some very wonky results. And then in the final segment, going to get you guys picks and analysis on every game on the betting board for this college basketball Thursday as we hit some bank shots. If you do have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you have one of two ways we all fire those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at gunit_81. Keep in mind, LarsCM, naming does not matter, so as per usual, please do send these into the timeline. And the other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. And then from there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. Well, I did not get in any Twitter/X questions today. Everything is powered by Better. That is BETR, who's making it easier than ever before to be able to get into the game, and you're able to just dive in with regards to daily fantasy, because when you sign up over at Better, that is BETR.app, and you put in the promo code of VSiNPod, VSINPOD, you get $10 free, and all you need to do to get into the game is just take a look at the board, take a look at a player, and think, all right, they're either going to go over or under their specific stats, and boom, you're all set to go. And we're all set to take a look at what we saw in a very fun day of college basketball on Wednesday. Try to find some trends and try to get to know these teams a little bit better.
Games from yesterday is Greg buzzing about. Here is the rowdy recap.
We had two big ranked matchups, and Alabama goes into the great state of Illinois, and they get a 90-86 win, technically a neutral court game, but for Alabama, they had LeBaron Filan really be able to step up. 24 points, goes 3 of 6 from three-point range. Tomislav Ivicic did return in this game, but he was very limited. Only played 15 minutes, 3 points, 3 rebounds out of him. You could tell that he wasn't fully 100% as Andrej Stojakovic tried to keep the team lively. He went 11 of 16 from the floor, but here was ultimately what doomed Illinois. 13 of 22 at the free throw line, while Alabama was much better at 17 out of 23 at the charity stripe. That 4 free throw difference, that turned out to be the difference in the game, and for Illinois, they lost the turnover battle 11-10 as well. And then in the other ranked battle, this was a good one with Arizona being able to persevere, get the job done on the road against UConn, 71-67. Now, Terrace Reed and a few others for UConn were out in this game, so that's something that you very much want to be noting. But for Arizona, the man that stepped up in this game was Jaden Bradley. Bradley was able to give the team 21 points, and he went 8 of 9 at the free throw line, as Arizona, 19 of 25 at the charity stripe, UConn, 9 of 18. That was the difference in this game as well. Always be handicapping free throws, and for UConn, they were able to have Eric Reeb come in. He was able to give the team 15 points. He was starting a little bit unexpectedly, but he was able to do a solid job there, but UConn wasn't able to get a ton off the bench, and for Arizona, off the bench, Toby Awaka, 7 points. He threw in their 7 boards, and for Arizona, they do control the glass, winning that battle 43-23. I have to think if Terrace Reed is in there, you get a little bit of better effort, but Arizona, very nice. They do get the job done, and they do find a way to persevere. In terms of a team that is not ranked, that had themselves a very nice as well, that'd be St. Mary's. They do take it to Arkansas State 85-72, and St. Mary's has actually been playing quite a few games where they have gotten 80 plus. I think that they've gotten 80 plus now in every game this season, as Mikey Lewis is proving to be one of the better shooters in all of college basketball. 3 of 5 from distance in this game. Supplies the team with 17 points. You had Paulius Marsoukas be able to supply 24 as well, and for Arkansas State, they go 9 of 29 from three-point range. They did force St. Mary's into 13 turnovers, but St. Mary's wins the battle on the glass with Andrew McKeever being able to get 17 rebounds. Now, if you look at that closing line, Arkansas State was able to cover pretty much all numbers in this game, as they were more like a 19.5 to a 20-point dog, but still very impressive what we are seeing out of the St. Mary's offense. Quite impressive what we've seen out of Bethune-Cookman thus far this season as well. They go on the road and they take down Ohio as an underdog, 76-73. You'll recall night number 1, they very nearly pulled it off against Auburn, and they go 8 of 15 from three-point range. Jordan Johnson was the main guy from distance in this one. He was able to go 4 of 6 from the outside. Ontario Morris threw in there 17 points. Jacoby Heedy had himself 20 as well. And for Ohio, just 2 of 17 from three-point range. As Jackson Pavletsky, he went 2 of 6 from 3, so the rest of the team went 0 of 11 from the outside. So that was a little bit less than tremendous for them. This was pretty tremendous for Villanova, though, as they were able to, in a Philly 5 matchup, get a win and cover over LaSalle, 70-55. For LaSalle, just not a lot doing for them. They lose the rebound battle, 33-28. They go just 3 of 13 from three-point range as the Duke Brandon, once again, a nice game for Villanova. Just 8 points, but 13 rebounds. And for Villanova, Matt Hodge was able to step up. He supplied that team with 17 points. And for this Villanova bunch, they did force LaSalle into 16 turnovers as well. So a little bit of a sloppier game out there. This has been very interesting to gauge what we've all been able to get out of Penn State as they do persevere over the smart kids of Harvard, but Harvard a quality cover, 84-80 the final. As for Penn State, they go 5 of 19 from 3, and Harvard 12 of 27 from three-point range. Penn State really has had a tough time being able to cover these numbers at home thus far this season, as they were able to cover that game against New Haven, and I believe that to this point, that might be their lone cover. They may or may not have been able to cover that LaSalle game as well, but they've been in a lot of transition with regards to that backcourt, so that's been hurting them quite a bit. For Michigan, they do not cover the over 25 points against Middle Tennessee, but they do get the job done, 86-61 final in this one. As for Michigan, they were only able to shoot 20% from three-point range in this one and still found a way. They will go 5 of 25 from 3, and for Middle Tennessee, they always hit up a lot of threes, and they did not hit. 10 of 37 from the outside, but for Michigan, Yaxel Lendeborg, who had been a little bit silent in the first few games, 25 points, 12 rebounds, his best game as a Michigan Wolverine. For Michigan, they've had a tough time with regards to turnovers, but they do win this turnover battle 15-13. As for Michigan as well, Ade Mara off the bench, he has been rock solid, double-double, 10 points, 10 rebounds, and then another ranked team that was in action, Auburn. They just completely land-based Jackson State, 112-66 a final. No look-at spot here for Auburn as they go 13 of 32 from 3. They shoot 65% from the floor, as on their two-point shots, they went 29 out of 33. So that was a nice expose, as Keyshawn Murphy, 8-11 from the floor. You had Elijah Freeman go 5 of 6 from the field. All these guys were able to do their part. And for Jackson State, you did have Deshaun Ruffin and Jamie Mitchell combined for 40 points. So the rest of the team, they really were not able to do their part in helping those two men out, but you were able to get plenty of help if you were on this game, as you did see William and Mary, America's favorite tag team, get a nice moneyline underdog win over Bowling Green. That's by a count of 82-74. For Bowling Green, they've been one of the best teams at generating turnovers in all of college basketball, and they played even up on the turnover battle, 18-18. But for America's favorite tag team, how about Tunde Valberg-Fassi, who was able to give the team 16 points, and he goes 4 of 7 from three-point range. And for Bowling Green, that 3 of 19 from three-point range, that was just not going to cut it for them. So that was a nice little bit of a money line underdog cash there, and then you were able to get this one to come through, as if you faded the ACC teams on Wednesday, you were able to do a pretty rock solid job. Notre Dame, they get a win but no cover against Bellarmine, this by a count of 86-79. As for Notre Dame, 7 of 19 from 3, and Carson Tout, not giving you a ton of scoring. He did have 12 points in this one. That's better than average for him, but he's been great on the boards, 11 boards. And for Bellarmine, they actually lose a rebound battle 31-17, but Bellarmine was able to shoot 54% from the floor, and they were able to remain plenty lively with winning the turnover battle by a count of 14-13. And then for Virginia Tech, they were laying a pretty hefty number against Bryan. Bryan holds in there 78-61 final in this one. As for Virginia Tech, you had the star freshman Nicolas Avadeas give the team 11 points, 5 assists, not necessarily the biggest scoring effort from him, but kept things relatively clean as Virginia Tech wins the turnover battle 14-10. But for Bryant, they cover this game despite going just 5 of 27 from three-point range, as they were able to get 13 points out of Quincy Allen, a former top 150 recruit. So they were able to do a solid job of being able to get you somehow some way to the window there. Creighton, they were unable to cover their game against North Dakota, 75-60 the final, as the North Dakota offense has taken a step back. Defense has been a little bit better, and for Creighton, just 8 of 38 from three-point range. Blake Harper goes 4 of 8 from distance, so the rest of the team was 4 of 30 from three-point. Josh Schicks was able to supply the team with 16 points, but for Creighton, they just weren't able to hit enough shots to be able to cover that one. And then this game got wild and crazy. How about Oklahoma State taking down South Florida 103-95, as South Florida has just been a machine to the over thus far this season. The lone game that stayed under the total was when Coppin State only provided 50 points, and for South Florida, they've actually gotten to at least 95 points in each of their first 5 games of the season, so they are very much pushing the tempo, but they also allowed Oklahoma State to go 11 of 22 from three-point, and Victorious Miller to be able to supply 24 points off the bench. Christian Coleman and Anthony Roy, both 15 points apiece, and for South Florida, you had Wes Enos be able to provide 20 points off the bench, but it went 7 of 19 from the floor. Not often that you see a player off the bench go 7 of 19 from the floor, but that's what you had in that game, so that was a very intriguing and a fun one to say the least if you like overs. Tennessee Tech, they provide a nice over against USC Upstate as well, 88-84 the final, with Mekhi Cameron getting it done for Tennessee Tech with 20 big points. And then for UMass Lowell, they've been a relatively brutal team, but they do get the cover here against Bradley, 87-77, so yay verily on that front for them being able to find a way to get a quality cover. And for TCU, it's been tumultuous to say the least to begin the season. They had that loss at home against New Orleans, but they got up 17-0 against the Kansas City Roos, and they won 81-45. Kansas City getting back to their defensive roots, but they also shot 23% from the floor. That's just not going to quite cut it. They lost the turnover battle 18-13, and when you have 18 turnovers and you have 13 made field goals, that's typically not going to be boding very well for you. I'm currently doing this as Washington State is up 25 points in the middle of second half against Southern Utah, so Southern Utah looking like they're going to be off to a rough against the spread start to this season. And how about Weber State all of a sudden getting their offense going? They take down Campbell, this by kind of 91-85. They were about a 1.5 to 2.5 point favorite, so they do cover that one, with Weber State being able to get 23 big points out of Tejan Sinai. And for Campbell, they've been really giving it up on defense, but they do go 28 of 31 at the free throw line, and DJ Turn It Up Smith, he was able to give that team 22 points as well. And then yay verily to Air Force, who will not lose them all. They are able to get it done in the final possession, 66-64 against Alabama State, so they avoid that. And South Carolina State looking like a little bit of a fade right now. Chattanooga, they go on the road 78-66 against a South Carolina State team that has a lot of big losses on their resume right now. And if you're taking a look at trend-wise, what we're getting in college basketball right now, after a harebrained start where we saw a bunch of overs and a bunch of favorites cash, things have very much ironed out. We have now seen the under it at about a 50.8% clip. This is now 356 overs to 366 unders, and favorites, they are now hitting at just below 49% against the spread, 352, 369, and 8 against the spread. And if you're taking a look at what we all saw on Wednesday, for Wednesday, it was a day in which the underdogs were able to reign supreme, how about 24-13 against the spread, with the over being relatively 50-50, 18 overs to 19 unders. That's what we're seeing in college basketball right now, and that's what we all got trend-wise on Wednesday. Coming up next, how about if we do take a look at what we're all getting in college basketball, these multi-team events and these big tournaments getting started up, and we're going to be chatting about that with our good friend Rocco Miller on the flip side right here on Consequences with myself, Greg Peterson, now a part of the Beast and Family Podcast. Are you looking to get an inside edge this college basketball season? Well, VSiN experts use CBB Analytics, the most comprehensive college basketball analytics platform in the world. See injury impact, on and off data, clutch time performance metrics, first versus second half splits, and so much more. Utilize the promo code of VSiN, that is VSIN, to get $30 off and find your betting edge over at cbbanalytics.com. That is cbbanalytics, all one word.com. For anyone that is new to VSiN, well, I wish you a friendly hello. This is an attention to anyone that is new to VSiN because you're able to get some free stuff with our daily newsletter. It's a great way to catch up on everything that's happening in the sports betting world. It's delivered straight to your inbox every single morning. VSiN's newsletter offers picks, data, strategies for the day's betting menu, and so much more. Sign up for free today over at VSiN.com/newsletter. That's VSIN.com/newsletter, and start receiving your free newsletter tomorrow morning. That is VSIN.com/newsletter. Stay ahead of the game and bet smarter with VSiN. And we're back here, lovely Las Vegas, for Cuts Go Seats with myself, Greg Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast, and it is always great to be joined by this man. We've got Rocco Miller aboard. You know him from his great work over at his website, bracketeer.org, but this man's doing a little bit of everything right now. You're able to catch him on Basket Under Review. That's the Trilly Donovan website. He and Sean Paul do a great job with the mid-major show on the Field of 68 as well. You're able to catch his tweets on the old Twitter/X at Rocco Miller, the first and last name of him and and the number 8 altogether. And Rocco, it's always a pleasure, my friend. Thank you.
Always good to be on with you, Greg. Appreciate you as well. We're right in the thick of it. We're getting ready for a bunch of tournaments starting here in the next couple of days, and we'll have nothing but tournaments all the way till November 30th.
Yep, it's going to be a whole lot of fun. You get these wonky neutral court games, and do you take more or less out of these neutral court games that we're going to be finding? Because I do find that a lot of times we get some wackadoo results with regards to some of these tournaments. Like when UConn lost 3 times in the Maui Invitational last season, that was quite eye-opening, to say the least, and they were able to recover after that. But how do you take a look at these multi-team events and these tournaments? Because I do think that we get some very intriguing results, and some of them really lead to being able to know the identity of some of these teams, and sometimes it's just a one-off of just a really bad week for a team as well.
I prefer to look at it case by case. I think based on the program, teams are going through different stages of their maturation process for the long journey. I think a lot of these teams, you'll notice, especially with the bigger schools, they've played nothing but home games so far. So for a lot of them, this is their first time getting on the road together and really getting to learn about each other without that routine that they've had all summer long, just staying on campus, showing up for practice, showing up for a home game. And so this will be a big change for them to play real games, some cases very secluded locations, probably on a resort, staying in a hotel room.
Sometimes in a ballroom.
Sometimes in a ballroom, exactly. So you'll see a bigger variety of outcomes because from a coaching standpoint, coaches are trying to still figure out their best combinations of players. Then you're also managing the rest and recovery element when we get into the second day of each of these events, which is where managing your minute usage and your workload per roster. And really, it takes a good 6 to 8 weeks of live games. So by the time we get to like the actual December holidays and into New Year's, that's when you're going to see most of these rosters really fine tune into their best, most dependable rotations. Are there exceptions to that? Of course there are. There are a lot of teams on top of that that are more the exception than the rule right now, that had continuity coming into the season, that have already drilled down to 7-man, maybe 8-man rotations. They could have an advantage in these events for sure. But at the same time, there's going to be some surprises. And a lot of times, almost every single year, Greg, we look back at November when we get to March and we're just like, how the heck did that team do this? Or, St. Mary's is a good example. I think most of the last few years, they've played horribly in their MTEs, but they're always in great shape by February and March. So it goes both ways. I think you just really have to, if you're trying to project, you have to understand the programs. You have to understand where they're at in their journey. If they kind of need this trip to find each other, win or lose, it's going to help them down the road.
Oh, no question about it. And it really gets started on Thursday because we've got ourselves the event that's happening over at T-Mobile in Missouri, not the T-Mobile event center out here in Las Vegas. There's 2 of them. There's one out there in Missouri. We've got 2 fun ones between New Mexico and Nebraska, Mississippi State and Kansas State. And then we've got the battle out there in the Bahamas between Texas Tech, Wake Forest, and Purdue, Memphis. And I think that's really interesting for a Memphis team that they just got drilled at home against a UNLV team that we both know is all sorts of banged up. And from my side of things, I look at this line with Purdue being a 15 to a 15.5 point favorite. And I'm not sure how you've evaluated Memphis the last few years, but I always think that when there's no expectations for Memphis, they overachieve. When there's actual expectations, they always underachieve. I'm not sure how you look at this, but I do think that this could be a little bit of a nice bounce back spot for a Memphis team that they needed after a really bad home loss.
Yeah, and that's typically how it goes with Memphis. When you're least expecting them to show up, they really, really bring it.
Whatever you expect, just if you expect the opposite of what you should be expecting, that's what you're going to get.
Yeah, that's where I'm going with the answer. Absolutely, Greg. So I think there's a wild stat out there when they're expected to win by 15 or more. They very rarely do it, if ever. They let teams that are layers below them in talent level hang around. And then when they get their opportunities to play the big boys, they almost always bring it. And obviously it's a new cast of characters, right? We have Doug McDaniel, Aaron Bradshaw, Sincere Parker, Julia Stedford, and a bunch of new faces. Ashton Hardaway boomeranged back from St. Mary's. But so there's a lot of actual logistics Memphis is trying to figure out and mold as we get towards conference play. In the meantime, they're going to get a bunch of these chances. And there's 2 chances right here in the Baha Mar ballroom, starting with Purdue, where the typical Memphis mantra is we're not backing down from anybody, and they're going to be the aggressors in this game. We'll see how Purdue responds to that. I mean, Purdue just finally got Trey Kaufman-Renn back. They played extremely well down in Tuscaloosa to get a really elite road win at Alabama, and followed that up with a dominant performance over Akron at home to tune up for Memphis. But I just think, if history serves correctly, even though all these Memphis faces are new on the court, I think they're going to be really hyped up to play Purdue.
And I have the exact stat for you. We're talking about how they don't cover those big numbers and everything like that. 0-14 against the spread. The last 14 times they've been at least a 2-touchdown favorite of at least 14 points. So that very much speaks to your point. And then when they're an underdog, they've been much better in that role. So I think that that's going to be a lot of fun. And that certainly has been one of the more surprising teams to begin the season. Memphis starting out 1-2. Would have thought that they would have been able to get the job done against UNLV. And UNLV has been a little bit of a negative as well. But have there been a few teams that really stood out to you that they've either underperformed or overperformed to what you were thinking they would do coming into the season?
Yeah, I'll start with overperform. You know me, Greg. I always like to celebrate the good. I'd say at the highest level, Northwestern's really impressed me. They only held on to win by 2, but they've been really dominant before the DePaul performance. Curious to see how they do coming up. They'll play Virginia in a big one on Friday, and then they get South Carolina Sunday, and follow that up with a Thanksgiving special in Chicago against Oklahoma State. So we're going to learn in the next week 3 different big samples of what Northwestern brings to the table. But I think the big story there is Arinton Page in the middle. Really, I think was undervalued in the preseason. He's already been the MVP in 2 of their performances. He went for 22 points, 5 rebounds, 2 assists in the win over DePaul. Came from Cincinnati and USC before that, is getting an opportunity here at Northwestern to break through. I'm not sure how his credits transferred over from those 2 places, but in the era of Big Ten basketball, I'm not sure that matters anymore. I think with, the obvious superstar of Nick Martinelli and some other good glue pieces around them, I guess, namely Jaden Reed and Trey Singleton, Northwestern's got something cooking here. They didn't have a lot of expectations coming into the year, so that's one that's really stood out for me. And one team I guess I'm more curious about is LSU. I think we talked about them on a previous show. They haven't really had the big test yet, but I love what I've seen from New Orleans. New Orleans wanted to go to LSU and win that like nobody's business, and LSU just chopped them up for a 35-point win. They'll go into an event that they should be able to win if their metrics so far line up, which is where they're going to play Drake, who's a little bit down and rebuilding under Eric Henderson, and then either Georgia Tech or DePaul for the championship. So I feel like LSU comes into that the clear favorite based on some early domination. But again, we haven't seen LSU go up against a Power 5 team. A lot can change. That's a team I'm really intrigued by. After that, they'll go to Boston College for the ACC SEC Challenge, another favorable, even though it's on the road matchup. But they do get Texas Tech and SMU in early December. So LSU, 5 of their next 6 games will play Power 5 teams. Excited to learn about LSU, but I think they've been a big surprise. And the other one is Colorado State. I know everybody's focused on the disappointment of Loyola Chicago. And of course, to answer the other end of your question, Loyola Chicago is a very appropriate answer to the question. But on the Colorado State end, they've been very dominant in 4 performances. I know that Loyola Chicago, Incarnate Word, Omaha, and Cal Poly. Cal Poly is really well coached. The other 3 were pretty invested this year roster-wise for their levels, and Colorado State's made chopped liver out of each of them. Right now, they're the 3rd best effective field goal percentage team, and that is weighted by competition per KenPom. Just really, really carrying that Nico Medved offense forward under Ali Farouk-Manesh. Really excited to see them play. They do have one more home test with Denver, and I'm a big Denver guy. I do think Colorado State too talented to mess around and lose that game. When they get to the Battle for Atlantis on Wednesday next week, Greg, Virginia Tech in the opener, that is probably the best matchup of the day on paper out of the 4 games there to start the tournament. And Colorado State, if things keep going this direction, we'll see. The sky's the limit. They might get a crack at St. Mary's on the second day with a win, and maybe a crack at Vanderbilt if they can make a run to the finals. So I'm just curious how far this Rams momentum can take them. I guess on the downside of things, Loyola Chicago, obviously I heard your reaction to them. Not great. Not great. I also think Tulane, had a lot of hype with Rowan Brumbaugh being the preseason player of the year. They did get destroyed by New Orleans at home. That's their only loss to date. And I get it. Tulane was playing a very hungry New Orleans team. But I just think they didn't perform that well in a couple of their other performances. Had to really rally to beat Texas State. Played okay against Stanford in the opener. And then Louisiana hasn't showed much yet this year. Tulane struggled with them. So that's a team that is a little disappointing so far. We'll see what happens from here. They get to play Utah State next. Not the best treat to try to get right. I would also say, just looking at Illinois State, that's a team a lot of people pick to win the Valley. Two of the best players returning in the conference. Chase Walker, most unanimously picked as the preseason player of the year. He was our field of 68 mid-major player of the year. And Johnny Kinziger is a guy that is all conference already. So with those two back, you just felt like they were going to be good, but they lose the opener to Ohio U. They get this amazing opportunity to play USC in Inglewood. I get it. It's a long trip to the West Coast, but it's not on USC's home floor. They weren't competitive. They end up losing by 20. And then they go to Long Beach State, a team that would just love to qualify for the Big West tournament, let alone have a good Big West record. And they barely beat them by 2 points. I just think Illinois State's got a lot to figure out. Ryan Pedon, head coach, is in his third year, has not gone better than 500 in the league. So got a lot of hype this summer. They've got a lot to sort out. They'll play in a tournament that if they are as good as advertised at the start of the year, they need to win it, because that event has Charlotte in their first game and then the winner loser of Furman Richmond. Furman also could be a good answer for your very big disappointment question. Good segue there. So there's a lot that have disappointed. Obviously Loyola Chicago, Furman, Illinois State, near the top of that list for me.
Yep, and I think that this has also been a big disappointment as well, and that's why the Thursday game between Nebraska and New Mexico becomes all the more important, as well as Rocco Miller, who does such great work over at Bracketeer.org, joining me right here on Coast to Coast Hoops. That'd be the Mountain West. Like, when you lose to a team in a strip mall in Boise State, losing to Hawaii Pacific, that's not great, but I mentioned it with UNLV, taking multiple losses. San Diego State, I recognize that they're banged up, but losing at home to Troy is a big favorite. That's not great. And just how open do you think that this Mountain West is right now? Because I just take a look up and down the boulevard, and I think New Mexico could make a big statement on Thursday. We just talked about Colorado State, how they've been one of the big teams in the conference. After Grand Canyon, they took a loss as well to Youngstown State. And I think that there's a real chance that we could see some chaos from a team like a New Mexico, a team from like a Wyoming, for example. I've liked what I've seen out of them, and I feel like this entire conference might be flipped on its head this season.
We'll see. I still think there's some great resources at the top of the league, and that should even itself out, balance itself out by the time we get to actual league play. We do have an early window for league play, December 20th, so it's a little bit early, a little bit before Christmas. I'm already eyeing that Colorado State-Utah State game on December 20th. That's where my head went. But I think overall, Utah State, I think I'm the only national media guy that picked Utah State to win the league. They haven't done anything to make me back down from that opinion.
They look good.
And they should go handle their business at Disney World this week, but we'll see. Like we talked about at the beginning, like these events have funny results sometimes. Davidson's look pretty good out of the A10. They're in the bracket with them against Davidson plays Boston College. Boston College got a lot of heat for losing to Central Connecticut, but they bounced back okay with a road win at Temple and handling Hampton. So I don't think this is a slam dunk for Utah State to take it down. They do open with the Tulane team that we just talked about. But yeah, so I think Utah State's holding up their end of the bargain. I already mentioned Colorado State's probably the best performing team in the league so far, but again, have to go play in Atlantis and a lot of big tests there. Wait and see on them. I think Boise State, out of the Division I games they've played, have been okay. They let Wichita hang around too much.
I like that Wichita team, though.
I was impressed that Boise had that thing at double digits most of the second half. And then Wichita, of course, stormed back and only lost by 3, but still a decent win for Boise. I agree with you that New Mexico is only going to get better. Eric Olin's a process coach, and playing up in this event starting on Thursday at the Hall of Fame is only going to help them get better. They'll get a crack at Nebraska, and then whoever they play in their second game, it's either Mississippi State or Kansas State. Those are great learning experiences to understand, how you're going to navigate the Mountain West waters. So whether they get out of there with a win or not, I think it's a very valuable event for the Lobos. I also agree with you. Wyoming's been better than advertised so far. You have to figure Grand Canyon and UNLV once they get things straightened out. UNLV a great win at Memphis after 2 bye-game losses. That will help the depth of the league. But yeah, the amount of times the league's already shot themselves in the foot, it's really starting to eat into the opportunities that are left to get multiple bids. And I think that's where the big concern comes from.
Yep, it certainly does, and that's been something that has been a bit of a takeaway for me thus far this season with them. And then we've obviously got a lot of big events that are going to be coming up Thursday, Friday, into the weekend, and into early next weekend. Are there just a few teams that you want to find out a little bit more about? Because I know that you're going to be out there in Jacksonville this weekend. You're going to be able to see those teams up close and in person. We've got games all across the planet at this point because you have tournaments out there in the Cayman Islands, the Bahamas. Unfortunately, the Great Alaskan Shootout, rest in peace to that. But you've got a little bit of everything going on. Are there just a few in general that you're taking a look at, and whether it's teams, whether it's tournaments, that you're just really having your eye on for the next few days?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to take in as much as I can because after Saturday, I'm going to be on a red-eye flight to Florida for the Jacksonville Classic. So I'll be there bright and early Sunday for UAB practice. And then I'll be on the call throughout that event and then into the Vegas event. So I'll be in your town.
We need more Rocco on these calls, by the way. I always love those.
Thank you so much. Yeah, MTE season's our time of year. So until I take off, I mean, I'm certainly looking forward to watching what's right in front of us. Like we talked about we didn't talk about Texas Tech side of that bracket, but really a team that I think's Final Four good. That's the mission for the season. When you go to an island tournament like they are for the Bahamas, a chance for Texas Tech to make a statement. Wake Forest has been a little bit better so far than I think projected, taking Michigan to the wire. Could have beat Michigan, quite frankly. And so Texas Tech opens there, but they'll get the survivor of that Michigan-Purdue game, probably the championship, as long as Texas Tech does what they should do. And I think Texas Tech wins that event. I'm excited to see if they can actually back my prediction up. But I think they're going to go down there on a mission. They already took a narrow loss to Illinois. I think that's got their focus. Set themselves up well for December where they have some other big matchups and then Big 12 play. I also think with the Paradise Jam starting, we're really excited on our show coming up this week. Dan Garrio of the Iona Gales, one of the youngest head coaches in America, knocked off Fordham recently. The Gales are 4-0. They open with Akron in that tournament, 5:30 p.m. Eastern on ESPN. So the day before, he's going to be on our show to help preview the event, to help talk about what's working. They have a top 15 tempo in America, Greg. I'm excited just to get to know Dan a little bit better. We have a ton of mutual friends in the coaching business. And I think that Iona-Akron matchup for the entire Paradise Jam slate is probably the most interesting game of the day on Friday. So certainly excited for that one. I think when you look at the Charleston Classic, you got a little bit of a bigger school bracket as well. We already talked about the Utah State side of it. Clemson, West Virginia was a very difficult game to break down, to know who's going to come out on top. I look at what Ross Hodge has done so far. We haven't seen West Virginia get out of Morgantown, so it'll be our first look at them. But yeah, I think some of the West Virginia faithful, especially with their football team not going to a bowl game this year, will make their way down to Charleston and support these guys. Obviously, Clemson should be well supported, being more of a local team in state. I think that's a phenomenal matchup. Clemson's defense has got the edge, both with effective field goal percentage defense and rebounding. But I think West Virginia's got some playmakers. That's a matchup I'm really excited for. 6:30 p.m. Friday night, Eastern time, ESPN2. So those ones definitely stand out.
Oh, there's going to be a lot of great college basketball that's going to be had the next few days, Rocco. You and I are in paradise, my friend. Like you were alluding to, you've got a very busy schedule here the next week and a half. I'm sure that you wouldn't have it any other way. So let the good people at home know it's all on tap for you and how people can follow along on social media to other platforms.
Appreciate it, Greg. Thank you. Yeah, bracketcheer.org is the mothership, the home website of all my work. We have some guest writers coming on throughout the season. Continue to check back for all of that. Track all your schedules throughout non-conference. Top 14 leagues are up there for you to go onto the site and just have a really easy glance, breaking it down, home, away, neutral. I think that's a much better way to look at the schedule than even the team websites. Appreciate all the support. We have a support button there if you wish to continue supporting us. We've appreciated all the support throughout the summer and into the fall. And then the Field of 68 mid-major show every Thursday, 5 o'clock Eastern through 6 o'clock. On Thursday, our guests will be Dan Garrio of the Iona Gales. And we're going to have Scott Cross on, Greg, the Troy head coach, coming off the big win over San Diego State. And they are playing USC Thursday night. So that'll be really exciting. We'll get a quick preview of that USC game from the coach's mouth, and also just what it was like being there for that crazy double overtime buzzer beater surviving win over the Aztecs. And last but not least, Basket Under Review, my main print website for now for special features. Interviewing conference commissioners has become a theme. We'll have another interview coming soon with departing Atlantic 10 Commissioner Bernadette McGlade. Just announced on Wednesday that she will be stepping down at the end of the year. And also check out the Teams of the Week every Monday. That's done by me. I recognize teams from all 31 leagues to make sure we're celebrating and undercovering every story throughout the great world of Division I basketball, and appreciate everybody's support.
Absolutely, and that's what it's all about, because when it comes to this show as well, you want to be taking a look at all these conferences. It doesn't matter if it's a big game, it's a small game, they're all big on this show, and Rocco, he does a great job highlighting this great game of college basketball, and every single time he joins me, he lends such amazing insights. So big thanks to Rocco for joining me on Coast to Coast Hoops, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast, and coming next, it is that time of the podcast to give you picks and analysis on every game on the betting board for this college basketball Thursday as we have some bank shots. Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. Always great to be joined by Rocco Miller. He does an amazing job over at Bracketeer.org, taking a look at this game that we all know and love of college basketball. Every single time he joins me, he lends such great insights, and he did so once again today. So a big thanks to Rocco for joining me in the last segment. And now it is that time of the podcast. I give you picks and analysis on every game on the betting board for this college basketball Thursday as we hit some bank shots.
Most financial establishments close at a certain time, but not here. It is time for a side and total on every game on today's betting board bank shots.
Do note that, as per usual, any changes that are made to these plays will be listed up on my Twitter/X feed at gunit_81, and we're going to be going in Las Vegas rotation order. This is where we go with the games with the bigger conferences featured first, and then the games involving teams from these conferences. That would be the Southland, the MEAC, the SWAC, the Big South, if I'm not already said the Big South. We've also got the Atlantic Sun, the Patriot League, and you also throw in there the Northeast Conference. Those are going to be conferences at the bottom. And note with these neutral site tournaments, those are always games that are going to be listed at the bottom. So even like Purdue versus Memphis that starts at 6 o'clock p.m. Eastern, that's going to be listed at the bottom because that's a part of a tournament. So you always get that going on. And let's get things started though with this game of 7-13, 7-14 on the card. Lindenwood, they are on the road against Indiana. Indiana is a 34.5 to a 35-point favorite, and your total is 159.5. I saw an opener of a 156. It's starting to go up. If you can get a 159 or less, I'm going to be in on the over. It's a Lindenwood team that plays at a relatively mid-tempo, and they were a top 65 team in the country last year in terms of turnovers forced on a per possession basis. Currently getting a little bit thrashed on defense, who are 99th in the country in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. Now, I will say for Indiana, the defense has been rock solid, 38th in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis, and they've been able to get past the 90-point plateau in all but one of their games. They had a little bit of a rough go of it against an Incarnate Word team as one of the slowest teams in all of college basketball in terms of total possessions per game, but we have seen Tucker DeVries and Lamar Wilkerson do a tremendous job in the backcourt. These two guys are combining for about 36.5 points per contest. DeVries throws in their 6.5 boards, 3 assists per game, and it is an Indiana team that, as a collective, they're shooting over 41% from three-point range, and with Lindenwood's style, they do sometimes gamble a little bit too much for turnovers, so even though they face off against teams that are not necessarily the world's greatest three-point shooting teams, they're allowing them to shoot darn near 36% from the outside, and Lindenwood last season was dead last in the country in terms of three-point shooting percentage at darn near 26.8%. They've been a little bit better this year at 31%, and you'd expect that. They bring back quite a few guys that were a part of that team from last season. Inez Fultrell, he comes back. He's been able to give the team 12 points per contest. Jadis Jones last year gave that team 12.5 points, 6 boards, not necessarily too much of a three-point shooter at 6'5", a little bit of a undersized big man, but now you're getting a bit more out of Dontrez Williams. He comes over from Abilene Christian after he was a nice 5.5 point per game guy there. Again, not someone that really bombed it from three, but I do think that having Makai Cooper getting his feet wet after he was a nice player over at Miami of Ohio last few seasons. Last year he was a starter, supplied that team with 6 points, 2.5 assists per game, shot 39% from three. I do think that this offense gets elevated just a little bit. Indiana, I think, is going to be able to get the job done easily, but I do think that this number has went a little bit too far. I think that this is a pretty improved Lindenwood team that can force a little bit of pressure. They're going to certainly lose that battle down low. I recognize that Indiana might not be as big of a team as they they were in the past, but you still have a guy in 6'11" Reed Bailey who's got versatility. He's able to grab some boards, and then you've got Sam Alexis, who was part of that title-winning team over at Florida last year, 2 years ago. At Chattanooga was a 7+ rebound per game guy. I do think that for Indiana, they do find a way to be able to get the job done. Do think that this line has went a little bit too far, though. Set my line at 31.5. I'm going to be willing to take those points with Lindenwood, and at a 159 or less, I like the over. 715, 716 on the card. Stony Brook is playing Osa Brown. What can Brown do for you? Well, if they keep this game close, they'll make you some money. They're between 4 and 5 point underdogs with a total of 138, and I said Stony Brook is a 5.5 point favorite. I'm going to be willing to lay the number. I have to really just downgrade Brown right now because they're dealing with all sorts of injuries. Their top returning player in Landon Lewis has yet to be able to hit the floor this season, and we're still waiting to see what we're going to be able to get moving forward out of AJ Lesbert, who was rock solid for the team 8 seasons ago. He was supposed to return for this team as well, but right now he's not even listed on the roster, so you've got a very strange situation there, and that's big because they lost their main guy in the backcourt from a season ago in Keno Lilly Jr. That has caused this team to be in a lot of transition, as right now their lead scorer has been a freshman in Isaiah Langham, who's been able to supply 12 points per contest, but he's seeing a lot of unexpected minutes. Adrian Odegino, he comes in, he's been able to give you about 10.5 points per game, but you just don't have as much down low. Nafara Dabo was able to give you a block. He was an okay rebound guy last season. He's been able to give you 8 boards, but he's like the only guy on the roster with over 4.5 rebounds per game. You only have 2 players on this roster right now with more than 2.8 rebounds per game, so Brown is getting decimated on the glass without having Landon Lewis out there. Their 2-point shooting percentage has very much went down, and we've got a Stony Brook team that they were terrible last year, but they revamped themselves and they brought in some nice players via the transfer portal. Eric Pratt, always a nice rock solid scorer for UW Milwaukee. He and Rob Brown, and Brown last season was over at Nichols. He provided that team with 13 points, a career 39% 3-point shooter. They've really been able to elevate this offense that was well outside the top of their in terms of points scored on a per possession basis. You've got the Goods down low and Richard Goods, who didn't give you a lot of scoring last year when he was over at Hampton, but as a freshman, pulled in their 4 rebounds per game. That gives this team a little bit more rough and tumble. They don't have a lot of guys who return from past seasons. Toby Onakanu, he's one of the main guys, and he saw good minutes as a freshman. He just hasn't been able to get out there on the floor because they really elevated themselves. They brought in a lot of talent in the offseason, and Oleg Kojenets, he began his career over at Wyoming, a guy that stands 7 feet tall, and he's capable of shooting threes. He's actually been able to give a little bit of versatility with that regard, but he's a guy that should be able to help out down low, giving you about 3.5 rebounds per game. So I do like what he's able to bring to the table with that regard as well. And I do think that when it comes to what you're going to be able to get out of this Stony Brook team, they're going to be a little bit more dialed in. The defense is still leaving something to be desired. They're right now giving up 62 points per contest, but much of that is a byproduct of facing off against a few non-D1 teams and a main team that, let's call it, it is going to be a little bit of a rough season for them. So their defensive numbers are very much warped. But that said, I do think that for Stony Brook, the way that they were able to elevate that offense, the way that they've got more scoring options than they did just a season ago, that allows them to be able to get the job done against a Brown team that just doesn't have a lot down low right now. I did set my total 139.5. I do think that you're close enough for late game felling, so I do like the over, and for Stony Brook, want to lay up to 5 with them. 717, 718 on the card. Northeastern is going to be on the road against Princeton. This is interesting as ESPN Bet and Hard Rock opened this total at a 154. It was taken off the board. It's all being relisted as a 150.5 as I'm doing this, and Northeastern opened up a 3.5 point dog. Now they're a 1 point underdog, so we have seen a lot of movement. This actually got down to a 143, so it feels like bookmakers have no idea what they're doing with this game, but I set my total at 144. Right now I'm seeing that 150. I'm very much going to be on the under. This is not the same Princeton team that they have been in past years. They lose each other top 3 scorers from a season ago, and with this Princeton squad, they have a very high reliance upon the 3-point shot. Right now, they're getting 38.2% of their points from made threes. That's a top 60 mark in all of college basketball, and they're shooting less than 35% from 3-point range. They go up against a Northeastern team that last year they were outside the top 250 with regards to opponents' 3-point shooting percentage. They're allowing opponents to shoot only about 32.5% from 3-point range. I think that that's going to be a little bit more the norm, as they did a nice job in terms of revamping in the offseason some of the guys that they've got, as you've got a few holdovers like an LA Pride who's been able to give you 17 points per contest. Mike Lanani, hopefully I said that correct, he comes over from Davidson after he last season gave that team 5 points, shot in the mid-30s from 3-point range, and you've got Yuri Fritz still in the fold. He's been able to take some nice strides forward down low, as Northeastern teams, when they've been at their peak the last few seasons, have typically been based around good rebounding, and Fritz, he's a 6'9" guy that's able to give you a little bit of outside shooting. He's throwing in there about 7 rebounds per game. game, and the addition of freshman Miles Newton has been very nice. He's been able to give this team a little bit of a blow, and I do think that on the flip side of things, just have a Princeton team that is not going to be able to do the world's greatest job down low. They're never really a team that does that, and they've gotten a little bit too fast for their own good. Last year, they were outside the top 3 in terms of total possessions per game. You lose your top 3 scorers, and trying to be able to pump up the tempo, that's a negative, as Dalen Davis is really the lone main scorer that they had back from a season ago. Last year, 8 points per contest. He's had to take ownership of the offense, 17 points, 3.5 boards, 3.5 assists per contest, but I mean, it's a Princeton team that I recognize that they played against some good competition, but this is just not a team that has a lot of talent right now. Malik Abduli, he's a former top 275 recruit down low. He's able to give you about 6 or so rebounds per game, but you're relying upon Jack Stanton and Jackson Hickey to be able to combine for about 19 points per game. These are just not guys that are knocking down threes. Stan Hickey, who's right now shooting over 50% from 3. We should see a lot of regression there. They don't have a lot of depth with regards to this bench as well. It just feels like they're trying to figure out what they've got. Typically, they bring in some star freshmen, and other than Sebastian Whitfield, they just really haven't done that over the last few seasons, and I do think that Northeastern is going to be able to do a good job controlling the glass, be able to do a solid job in terms of being able to guard the three-point arc, and Northeastern, they themselves outside the top 25 in terms of total possessions per game. So I did make this line 2. With Princeton, they opened up as a 3.5 point favorite. Right now, I'm seeing this line at 1. Personally, I would rather be able to get more than 2 with Northeastern. If it comes down to a pick'em game, I would be leaning towards Princeton right now at this -1 number. So we'll see where this goes, because this line has been all over the place. At the current number of 1, I would be willing to lay it with Princeton. And with regards to this total, I like the under. I set my total at 144. 719, 720 on the card. Central Michigan is playing us at Northern Kentucky. Northern Kentucky is a underdog of 3.5 to 4.5 points, and your total is 147 and set a total of 146.5. So 147 does become that buy point on the under. You've got a Central Michigan team that they are in a little bit of a coaching change. You bring over a guy that was doing a nice job over at the Division II ranks over at Ferris State over the last few seasons, and Andy Brockmo has been able to bring in some of his Division II guys. He pairs him up with Fat Brooks. That's a great name. He was over at Michigan 8 seasons ago, being able to give that backcourt a little bit of elevation. And then Rodney Johnson, who was over at Tennessee Tech last season, shot 40% from 3, nice off-the-ball score with 13 points, 6 boards per contest, a little bit of size. He fits his versatile style very well, but it's been the 7-footer Nathan Clearbot, who has come on over from the D2 ranks, along with Brockma, who's really been able to help this team out down low. 11.5 points, 8 rebounds per game for a Central Michigan team that in past years they haven't necessarily had the world's greatest amount of rebounding. You bring in a guy like a Keenan Gardner who's stands 6'6". He's able to lend a little bit of versatility for this team as well. Central Michigan shooting about 32.5% from 3-point range. I don't think that that's necessarily a warp number or anything like that, but they're doing a nice job grabbing about 13.5 offensive rebounds per game with their overall size and versatility. And then you've got a Northern Kentucky team that's relatively gutted from a season ago. For Northern Kentucky, they typically rely upon generating turnovers, good rock-solid defense, and you bring back Dan Gresinger, who in the final 12 games of the season last year was averaging over 12 points per contest, and he's now become that go-to scorer with 17 points per game, but they're really looking to a freshman in Elijah Elliott to really run the show, be the point guard. He actually comes on over from the country of Australia, but they've just got a lot of misfit pieces and not a lot of size. LJ Wells is back after he gave the team 6 rebounds per game. You're looking to Keel Robinson, who comes on up from the non-D1 ranks at 6'6", 6'7". He's been able to give you about 5.5 rebounds per game, but for Northern Kentucky, even though they're doing a great job in terms of grabbing offensive rebounds for themselves, they're allowing their opponents to get a lot of second and third chances, and for Northern Kentucky, they're allowing teams to shoot 35% from 3. They've been a little bit rough without outside shooting over the last few seasons, and losing those main scorers from a season ago has led to the team being a little bit rough in terms of their overall shooting. That 35.5% three-point shooting percent should see a little bit of a downtick. They bring in Donovan Ode, who last season over at Cal State Fullerton was a nice double-figure scorer for them, but as a career 28% three-point shooter, he's been shooting out of his mind to begin the season, and the three-point shooting regression is noted by the fact that currently at the free throw line they're shooting 56%. That is not great, to say the least. Their games involve a lot of turnovers, so I do think that things get a little bit sloppy. So I total 146.5. I'm going to take a 147 or higher to the under, and for Central Michigan, made them a 4.5 point favorite. So right now, seeing that 3.5, I'm going to be willing to lay that. 721, 722 on the board. It is from the Ocean Center, Central Florida and Pittsburgh. Neutral court game, but it's in the state of Florida. And right now, Central Florida is a 1 to 1.5 point favorite. So on this game, it is 155.5. And with Central Florida, I did set them as a 2 point favorite. So if you're at the 1.5, I'm going to be willing to lay it. With Central Florida, I do think that they're going to be able to win the battle down low, because you've got Michael Stillwell, who last season over at UW Green Bay was a rock solid double figure rebounder, and he really willed this team to victory over the weekend, as well as they had that game against Oklahoma State. He did a very rock-solid job with that regard. And for the Central Florida team, they do have another guy that was playing with Stillwell last season in Themis Folks, and he's very used to being able to dole out offense with them. And Folks has actually been a 4+ assists per game guy at 2 different stops. Over at UW Milwaukee, along with Louisiana, he stepped in. He's been able to give the team 7.5 assists per game. Not give you a ton of scoring, but Riley Kugel had a really good run like 2 or 3 years ago in terms of scoring over at Florida. He's really been able to elevate and find that form once again. 18 points per game, currently shooting 57% from 3, and Central Florida shooting as a collective 47.7% from 3. That is not going to be continuing. That said, I do think that Central Florida cleans up the 14 turnovers per game, and they face off against a Pittsburgh unit that is going to be built a little bit more down low as well, with Cameron Corn being able to deliver for the team 14 points, just under 10 rebounds per game. And then he doesn't give you a ton of scoring, but Papa Amandu Kante has been able to give you 7.5 rebounds per game as a 6'10" big man coming in off the bench. They're going to be reliant upon DeMarco Minor to really run the show. The Omari Weatherspoon, the freshman guard, has also been able to give you 3.5 assists per game along with Minor, but Minor comes over from Oregon State, where last year he was a do-it-all guy. Not necessarily too much of a scorer with about 9 to 10 points per contest, but was able to give that team like 5 boards, 4 assists. He's been a mid-30s three-point shooter thus far. And Pittsburgh overall, they're shooting 38.2% from 3. They've been pretty good at being able to guard the perimeter. Teams are shooting 27.7% from 3-point range against them, but you do have a Central Florida team that's looking to gun it. Last year, they were in the top 10 in all of college basketball in terms of total possessions per game. I don't know if they're going to be quite that fast this year. That was by far the fastest that one Johnny Dawkins team ever really played at, but that said, for the Central Florida team, they are back in the top 75 in terms of total possessions per game. It does appear as though Pittsburgh is going to be looking to play a little bit more of a slow and controlled style with their post pieces, as they're currently 327th in the country in terms of total possessions per game. So good old situation of something's got to give. I did say I told you you're at a 158. I do think that this game, close enough for late game felling, and the Ocean Center actually provides a really good shooter's eye from the neutral court games that I've seen. So I'm going to be in on the over, and with Central Florida, I'm willing to lay up to 1.5 with them. 723, 724 on the card. Robert Morris is going to be on the road against St. Bonaventure, and the Bonnies are a 10.5 point favorite total on this game. It is 146.5, and with the Bonnies, I made them a 15-point favorite. So I'm going to be willing to lay it. With Robert Morris, they got off to that tumultuous start to the season against Iowa, and this is very much a new-look team. You pretty much lose 4 of your top 5 scorers from a season ago. Now, I do like what they're getting down low out of Nicolas Chedikulis. He comes over from North Carolina A&T, where he was given that team 9+ rebounds per game, and he's elevated his scoring 15.5 points, 8.5 rebounds per game. It is a Robert Morris team that is having a very difficult time taking care of the ball, though. 16.5 turnovers per game, and they're not getting to the free throw line too much. They're outside the top 315 in terms of free throw attempts on a per possession basis. Much of that is due to the fact that they're trying to break in a new backcourt along with Ryan Prather. Prather is back from a season ago where he gave the team 8.5 points, shot 40% from 3, but was very much an off the ball scorer. Not necessarily a guy that created too much of his own offense. And now you've got he and Albert Vargas, who have been able to do a nice job in terms of giving you a little bit of facilitation. But those 16.5 turnovers per game, despite the fact that you do bring in a good guy in Deshaun Good, who was over at IU Indy last year, giving that team about 8 points per contest. That's hurting you. And for the Bonnies, this has never been a team that's had too much of a rotation. If they were to try to open up a restaurant, they'd be probably sued for copyright because it would be 5 guys. But that said, they went a little bit further into the bench this season as they're trying to ease back to Shante Bowen after he had like a 10-game sample size where he looked rock solid for the team last year and then suffered a little bit of a rough injury. So they've been giving Amari Marshall a little bit of time, and that's been much needed. He comes over from Albany, where he was giving that team 14 points, a career about 37% three-point shooter, and you know that with the St. Bonaventure team that they're never really going to get out of sorts. Typically, they're outside the top 275 in terms of total possessions per game. For the Bonnies right now, 343rd in the country, so they're doing a nice job playing a nice, slow, controlled game. For St. Bonaventure, they always try to do the little things well. Right now, the 12 turnover screen, that's a little bit higher than what you'd expect, but they're doing a nice job pulling in their second and third chances. They've been a top 75 team with regards to rebound percentage, going up against a Robert Morris team that has been a little bit lackluster down low with losing Alvaro Fergilius. I do think that that's going to be able to win out in this ordeal, and having Daryl Simmons come in, run the show for this team in terms of a scoring standpoint, 19 points on 38.5% three-point shooting, and having Frank Mitchell down low, who averaged a double-double 2 years ago over at Canisius, that should allow this Bonaventure team to get the job done. Set my line at 15. I'm going to be willing to lay with the Bonnies. I think that St. Bonaventure slows this game down. Set my total 141, so I'm in on the under. 725, 726 on the card. Miami is going to be playing against Elon. Elon is a underdog of 20.5 points. Totals between 116 160.5 to a 162, and I'm going to be willing to lay it here with Miami. I did set them as a 24.5 point favorite. Now, Elon has actually become a top 150 team in terms of points scored on a per possession basis, and they've gotten past the 80 point plateau in every game that they played this season. That said, all the opponents that they have played have either been non-D1 teams or outside the top 225 in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis, and for Miami, they've actually been very impressive with their defense. They're currently 27th in the country in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. They're really doing it with a lot of horsepower down low, as Jai Lucas really went to the transfer portal to bring in big men like an Ernest Uday, who was over at TCU, gave that team 7+ rebounds per game. Malik Renew, he's right now giving you 21 points, 7.5 boards after he was at Indiana last season. The backcourt has been solid as well. Trey Donaldson was a nice part of that my Michigan team 8 seasons ago. He's been able to give 15.5 points, 6 assists per game, and Miami also doing a nice job of generating turnovers. They've been able to get above 15 turnovers per game. They're allowing teams to shoot less than 30% from three. A little bit of a byproduct of the fact that they've played some lesser teams to begin the season. When you're going against the likes of Stetson, Jacksonville, what have you, that helps out, but they have given up fewer than 70 points in every one of their home games this far this season. That excludes the game that they played against Florida on a neutral court. And for Elon, you've had Chandler Cothrell come in after he was over at Purdue Fort Wayne last year, was a solid player over at Purdue Fort Wayne, a sixth man that gave that team 7.5 points, 6 boards, and right now he's averaging 24.5 points, 7 rebounds on a little bit over a steal per contest. I don't know if that's quite going to be lasting with him. You've had Judge Juwan Carr come in. He's been able to give the team a little bit of facilitation with about 4 assists per contest. And Kepler Kalanic, he began his career over at St.Joh's, where he actually saw some very meaningful playing time. He was a starter for them during the 2022-23 campaign. He's done a nice job, giving the team 13 points, 9 boards per contest. It has been an Elon team that has left a little bit of something to be desired defensively, but I do think that an Elon team that's averaging only about 9 turnovers per game, that is going to be going northward against this Miami team. I think that Miami is going to be looking to play a little bit more of, shall we say, the 40 minutes of HE double hockey stick style like we saw with Arkansas way back in the day. That just feels like that's their mantra right now. Miami about 63rd in the country in terms of total possessions per game. Elon 61st, but I think that the Miami defense holds up, and I think a untested Elon team, they get a rude awakening here. I set my line at 24.5. I'm going to lay with Miami, and I'm in on the under, set my total 152.5. 727, 728 on the card. Tennessee is going to be playing us to Tennessee State. Tennessee State does find themselves as a big giant underdog here of 31.5 to 32.5 points. 151 to 151.5 is the total. And for Tennessee State, I did make them an underdog of 28.5 points. I'm going to be willing to take those points. With Tennessee, they're dealing with a lot of issues in the backcourt right now. They're outside the top 260 in terms of turnovers on a per possession basis, as they bring in Jacoby Gillespie, who was a big part of my Maryland team from 8 seasons ago, and he's been able to give the team scoring with 16.5 points, 6 assists per contest, but the 3.8 turnovers per game have been a little bit less than savory. It's a bunch of shooting 36% from 3, and Nate Ament at 6'10". He's been able to give the team 20 points, 9 boards, 3 assists, so he's been great there, but he's attempting a few more threes than you probably want him to at 6'10". He's shooting less than 30% from the outside, and you've got Felix Apara down low, who's been rock solid, 8.5 points, 6 boards, block and a half per contest, and that's what you can expect out of Tennessee. Tennessee over the last 5 seasons has been in every single season in the top 15 in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis, but now they face off against a Tennessee State team that last year was 62nd in the country in terms of rebound percentage. Sure, they lost a few guys from 8 seasons ago, but we retained Carlos Williams, who began his career over at Tulsa. He was a 4+ rebound per game guy 8 seasons ago. Aaron Nabakura, he's back after he began his career at the junior college level, went to Tennessee State last year and did it all with about 11 points, 5.5 boards, 3 assists, stealing that per contest. Not a great 3-point shooter, and this Tennessee State team as a whole is not necessarily a great 3-point shooting team. You've got Travis Harper back though, and the offense really elevated when he returned, as he missed like the first 10 or so games of the season last year. He shot 37% from 3, 10 points, 4 boards, stealing half per contest. I like his game, and for Tennessee State, they're a team that they have a tough time taking care of the ball. They are right now turning the ball over about 15 times per game, but they themselves last year were a top 75 team in terms of turnovers forced on a per possession basis as well. So I think that you get a sloppier game. Tennessee State is looking to play a little bit more tempo. They were last year a top 75 team in terms of total possessions per game, but I do think that this is going to be all sorts of sloppy, and with the Tennessee State team being one that can actually do an okay job on the glass against Tennessee, I don't think that they win that battle, but I don't think that they get completely plowed. I think that they hold in this game. So set my line at 28.5. I like the points here of Tennessee State, and I'm in on that under 729, 730 on the card. Florida Atlantic plays us a Pacific. Pacific, I'll be specific, is an 8.5 point underdog. Draw on this game, it is 156.5. Set my line at 7.5. So you're at the 8+. I do like the points with Pacific. With Pacific, they did a nice job in terms of retaining their main scorer from a season ago in Mr. Elias Rolfe. He actually came over from the country of Canada with Dave Smart, and Smart was actually a very good Canadian coach over at Carleton College, way back before he took this specific job, and right now they're looking to break in the nice transfer portal pieces that they got in the offseason. Alexis Marmaiolis was a 14-plus point per game scorer over at Lamar. Hasn't done a ton for this team. You've got a nice main facilitator in Jaden Clayton, who last year over at Maine gave that team 7.5 points, 4.5 assists, steal and a half per contest, leaves something to be desired with his outside shooting, but doles out good, clean offense, and that helps out a guy like TJ Wainwright, who last year over at Long Beach State shot 40% from three with 13.5 points per contest. And on the other end, you've got a Florian Lang team that they're going to come and go as Cannon Carlisle does, who I still remember 2 years ago over at Stanford. He had just a massive run, helped them pull off a few upsets, but you just don't know if you're going to get good Cannon Carlisle or if you're going to get bad Cannon Carlisle. Right now he's shooting 27% from three. He's sort of the new version of Caleb Love. He can shoot you into a game, and boy, can he shoot you out of a game. So there's that, but you've got Devin Vanderpool, who's been very nice and versatile for this team. He is back after he was a more ancillary role player 8 seasons ago, 17.5 points, 6.5 boards, 3.5 assists per contest beginning the season. And for Florida Atlantic, they're shooting about 34.5% from three. Last year, their three-point shooting defense was horrible. They were outside the top 350 in terms of opponents' three-point shooting percentage, and they're right back there. They're allowing opponents to shoot over 41% from three-pointers. So I do think that keeps Pacific relatively lively in this game for this Florida Atlantic team. They play fast, but they don't necessarily play at like super-duper warp speed or anything like that. Currently for Florida Atlantic, they're about 148th in the country in terms of total possessions per game. You've got a Pacific bunch right now checking in about 156th, but with there being a lot of open looks for this Pacific team, I do think that they hold in there in a little bit of a nice high-scoring expose. Set my line at 7.5. I'm willing to take 8+ here with Pacific. Made my total 157.5, so here at the 156.5, I like the over. 731, 732 on the card. Missouri is going to be playing us to South Dakota. South Dakota, a 28 to a 28.5 point underdog. 172.5 was the opening total, and we're now seeing this reach a 174.5 to a 176, and I set my total at a 173.5. Now that we're getting to a 174+, that does become my buy point on the under. You got a Missouri team that last year was a top 10 team in terms of points scored on a per possession basis, and they're still a pretty efficient offense, but they're not like absolutely gunning it or anything like that. They are outside the top 125 in terms of total possessions per game, and with Dennis Gates, he went with a little bit more size. You've got a 7-footer in Sean Phillips, who comes on over from Arizona State. He's been able to get the team 7.5 rebounds per game. That addresses the issue that Missouri has been pretty much in every year Dennis Gates has been there, a below average rebounding team. You got Sebastian Mack back from a year ago. The Mack attack has been able to give 10 points. Helps out with regards to the offense as Jaden Stone and Mark Mitchell have been versatile pieces combining for about 31.5 points per contest. And it's a Missouri team that should see a bit of regression with their 44% three-point shooting. They've got solid three-point shooters. They don't necessarily have that level of amazing three-point shooters. You've had Anthony Robinson be able to do a nice job being able to supply the team with 13 points per contest. And on the flip side of things, you do have yourself a South Dakota team that has been one that has had a tough time with regards to their defense, but was really good at taking care of the ball last year. Top 5 team in terms of fewest turnovers on a per possession basis, but they do lose Paul Bruns from a season ago, one of the main headline scorers, but his brother Isaac Bruns is back after he was able to give the team double figures last year. He's up to 17 points per contest this year, and I do believe that South Dakota is going to play a little bit slower than they did last year when they were a top 20 team in terms of total possessions per game because their 7-footer and Cameron Fens got injured mid-season. He's back. He's giving the team a block, 8 points, 5 rebounds per game. That should help them out a little bit with the overall size they're going to be facing with this Missouri team. It is a South Dakota team that's also allowing teams to shoot less than 30% from three. That should be going northward a little bit, but we should see a bit of regression with this Missouri three-point shooting as well. Interesting little bit of circumstance here. Some online at 25.5. I do think that South Dakota does just enough to hold in there against the Missouri team that I think is going to see their three-point shooting tip just a scotch, so I do like the under of anything of like a 175+, and I'm going to be willing to take those points with South Dakota. 733, 734 on the card. It is Oral Roberts on the road against Oklahoma. Oklahoma 24.5 to a 25.5 point favorite. 163.5 to 165 is the total, and for Oklahoma, made them a 23-point favorite, so I'm going to be willing to take those points with Oral Roberts. With Oral Roberts, they bring in Corey Barnett to be able to headline this team as their new coach, and he's done a really good job of just restoring a little bit of roar. Recognize that they lost that game against Tulsa, but they were very competitive there. The Belmont loss was a little bit less than savory, but their defense looks to be getting online after Barnett was an assistant over at West Virginia last year, a team that was in the top 20 in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis, and he's looking for a lot of just, shall we say, size size along the wing. He's got pretty much 5 or 6 different rotation players that are at least 6'6", including 2 Yamanachi Williams, who he began his career over at Lamar in Portland, missed all of last year due to injury, but when you saw him 2 years ago over at Portland, he played in 12 games, 8.5 points, 5 boards. He was shooting in the high 30s from three-point range, so he really gives this team some nice versatility at 6'10". It is an Oral Roberts team that's been a bit sloppy with the ball with about 14.5 turnovers per game, and it's an Oral Roberts team that is looking to get a little bit back to their roots. They've been playing a little bit faster this season in terms of total possessions per game. Right now, they are checking in 35th in all of college basketball. Meanwhile, they're playing against a Oklahoma team that has been about 126th in terms of total possessions per game. This is a Porter Moser style that has really been speeding up over the last few seasons, trying to get with the times, and they might have a tough time with Ty Harper on the flip side for Oral Roberts, who's been able to give that team nearly 2 steals, 16 points per contest. And for Oklahoma, I do recall night number 1 against St. Francis of Pennsylvania, had a tough time in that first half before they were really able to pull away, and this has been an Oklahoma team that's left quite a bit of something to be desired. Defensively, they've been outside the top 120 in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis, with opponents shooting over 36% from 3 after Oklahoma last year was a top 25 team in terms of opponents' 3-point shooting percentage, but they do have a lot of firepower in the backcourt. Xavier Brown, Nigel Pack, they're packing it in with 19 points per contest apiece. Both of these guys are able to facilitate. Both of these guys have been main scorers at their respective stops, and with regards to Mr. Pack, he's right now shooting 46% from 3-point range. This is going to be an Oklahoma team that probably leaves a little bit of something to be desired down low, but you don't necessarily have a Oral Roberts team that's absolutely going to be pounding it down low. You've got Darren Reed, who stands right around about 6'8", a former top 25 recruit that just hasn't necessarily been able to develop the way that you were hoping he would. He was a nice ancillary piece over at Alabama last season, but you're probably going to be looking to 6'10" Mohamed Wagyu to be able to give you a little bit more of something down low. So it's an interesting circumstance. I did set my total here at a 165. At the 163.5, 164.5, I do like the over as Oral Roberts is really looking to push tempo, and I think Oral Roberts holds in there. Set them as a 23-point dog, so I like the points. 735, 736 on the card. Rice, we give our own to Lane Kiffin. Go Owls. They play us to Tarleton St. Tarleton St, an underdog of 4.5 points. Total on this game, it is 147, and with Rice, I set them as an 8-point favorite. I'm going to be willing to lay this number for Rice. They did an okay job of holding in there against Tennessee, and this is clearly an offense that's better than they were last season when they were well outside the top 200 in terms of points scored on a per possession basis. You've got Trey Borneau back after he was a nice double-figure scorer and a go-to guy last season, but now you're able to pair him up with Nick Anderson, who comes on over from Prairie View, had his season cut short due to injury, but in 12 games at Prairie View, he's given that team 19 points, 5 boards, steal per contest, shooting in the mid-30s from 3-point range, and then you've got one of the main holdovers from the Rob Lanier system, going all the way back to assignment SMU, Jalen Smith, give you double figures as well. It's a Rice team that doesn't necessarily have ideal size. Jimmy Oldekun has been able to give you about 6 or so rebounds per game. He stepped in. He's been able to do a nice job with that regard, but it's not like Tarleton State is necessarily going to be batting down the hatches down low. This is a Tarleton State team that's much better with their offense, though, than they were a season ago. Last year, they were outside the top 355 in terms of points scored on a per possession basis. They bring in Dior Johnson, a former top 100 recruit. He's really been able to elevate this offense with 23 points per game, and Freddie X, who was the top scorer for the team like 3 years ago, was solid over at Arkansas State, came back to Tarleton and got injured last year. He in his 6-game sample size thus far, 12 points per contest, and he's not necessarily shooting it well from 3, but he's given the team 4 boards per contest. And I will say with Dior Johnson, his 22.7 points per game are coming off the bench. He has not started in a single game thus far this season, so that's very interesting. And Tarleton State is always a team that is looking to generate turnovers. Last year, a top 5 team in terms of turnovers forced on a per possession basis. They've taken a half step back with that regard, and they are getting plowed down low. They're allowing opponents to shoot over 56% on their 2-point shots. This is a style that very much gambles for turnovers and doesn't necessarily have a lot of size. You do have Christian back down low. He was able to give the team 5.5 rebounds per game last year. He's doing the same this season. And Andy Sigskar, he's at 6'9". He comes on over from the country of France. He's been able to give this team a little bit down low as well. But outside of Dior Johnson, they just don't have a lot of guys that are creating their own offense. They've been dealing with injuries once again. That's just what the system does to you. And I do think that Rice finds a way to take care of the ball and get the job done. I did set my total at 146 with this new look Tarleton style. I think that you're just a skoge a bit too high here, so I'm going to be in on the under, and I'm going to be willing to lay with Rice. Go Owls. 737, 738 on the card. Western Michigan is on the road. They're facing off against Ohio State and the Ohio State University. A 27.5 point favorite. Totals between 155.5 to a 156.5. And with Ohio State, I did set them as a favorite of 26.5 points, so I'm going to be willing to take the 27 plus here with Western Michigan. Now, Western Michigan, just a brutal 3-point shooting team last year. They were outside the top 330 in terms of their 3-point shooting percentage. They did lose a lot of their pieces from the backcourt. Not necessarily the world's worst thing, but they didn't necessarily replace it with a ton of three-point shooting. You bring in Jaden Brewer, who's the do-it-all guy over at Florida National last year, 14.5 points, 5 boards, a steal and a half per contest, but a career 22% three-point shooter. Right now shooting 40% from three with Western Michigan. That should be going downward, but his Western Michigan team was also a top 80 team in terms of offensive rebound percentage, with one of the main men being Max Burton, who last season as a starter, about 5 boards, 6 points per game. He should be able to continue to help out with that regard, as it is a Western Michigan team that right now has been playing relatively good on the glass. They've been a top 125 team with regards to rebound percentage. You're going to need that against Ohio State and Devin Royal, though you do have Josh Ojole, who comes over from Baylor right now, deal with an injury, so that helps out this Western Michigan team in terms of being able to hold in there down low. And then you've had Jalen Griffith do a nice job coming on over from Jacksonville to be able to up the scoring. Didn't really see a lot of minutes over at Jacksonville last season, but Griffith has been able to slide the team with 16 points. He's giving out about 4 assists per game for a Western Michigan team that does need to clean up their act a little bit with regards to the turnovers, 16 turnovers per game. This for a team that is not playing super slow, but they're not necessarily looking to gun it. And for Ohio State, they're about 183rd in the country right now in terms of total possessions per game. That's actually low considering they played a game against IU Indy. If they didn't play against IU Indy, they'd be well outside the top 225 right now in terms of total possessions per game, but a very efficient offense. You've got Bruce Thornton back, who's giving you 25 points per game. He's right now shooting the snot out of the ball, shooting 56% from three. That's going to be going downward a little bit, but John Mobley is right now shooting 40% from three, 15 points per game. That's relatively sustainable. Christoph Tilley is a true 7-footer that comes over from Santa Clara, 17 points, 6 boards. He's able to give you a little bit of three-point shooting ability as well, and then I do like the pickup of Brandon Noel, 6'8", do-it-all sort of guy who was over at Wright State last season, but with regards to this Ohio State team, they're only averaging about 8 offensive rebounds per game. So this Western Michigan team, I think, does just enough to hold in there on the glass, especially against an Ohio State team that doesn't generate a lot of turnovers to be able to hold in there. And I do think that this is going to be a little bit of a sore game. Semi-total 152.5, like the under and the points here with Western Michigan, 739, 740 on the card. Cal Poly is on the road against Utah. Utah's a 12 to 12.5 point favorite, and 168.5 to 170.5 is the total. And this semi-total 165.5, I do like the under. For Utah, it's just been all about Terrence Brown, who's been able to give you 21 plus points in 3 out of the last 4 games. He has saved this team from being victims of a few outright losses, as for Utah, they've won all 5 of their games, but I don't believe that they've covered the spread in any of them thus far. They've got some versatility. Tom McHenry coming on over, giving this team 16 points per game. He's never been like a super-duper explosive three-point shooter, though. His career about 33% three-point shooter was very rock solid in terms of giving the Western Kentucky bunch a steal and a half per contest a season ago as well, but they're very reliant upon Keno Dawes, although he's been able to supply this team with 11.5 rebounds per game. He's been looking very rock solid, and they should be getting a little bit more of James Okonkwo moving forward, who's been all over the place. West Virginia, North Carolina, Akron, and he was missing for the first few games of the season. This year, he's coming in the last 2 games, and he's been able to give you 8 rebounds per game, which that should taper off the Utah scoring just a little bit, and should be allowing for a little bit more of, shall we say, traditional style basketball. So this had a total here of a 165.5. You've got a Cal Poly team that's looking to gun it last year under Mike DeGeorge, a top 10 team in terms of total possessions per game, and currently they're giving up a nice hearty 85 points per game, even though they're actually having a positive rebound differential right now this season. The big thing is they're allowing opponents to shoot over 34.5% from three. This is a team that is supposed to be based around their backcourt. You've got Hamad Musa, who's been leading the way, giving the team 17.5 points per contest after beginning his career over at Dayton and just not seeing the floor over there. Peter Benjai, he's one of the main holdovers from a season ago. Last year gave you about 8 points per game. He's been able to elevate off of that. And Kieran Elliott got injured in the early part of the season last year. He was able to give that team 5.5 points, 3.5 boards, and now he's back. He's been able to give you about 7.5 to 8 points per game. It is very much a whole is greater than some of its parts sort of approach. Just with this bunch, you've got a guy in Jake Davis who had some major conference experience as well. He's been able to come in. He's been able to give you about 7.5 points per game. I do think that Cal Poly is only shooting about 32.5% from three. Just isn't quite the same offense as they were a season ago, and the 16 turnovers per game have been a little bit costly, and I do think that that's going to end up keeping this game under. I did set my total at a 165.5. I do like the under, and recognize that Utah has yet to be able to cover a number. I do think that their size advantage allows them to be able to take it to this Cal Poly team, so willing to lay that number to go along with the under. 741, 742 on the card. It is Houston, and they play us a Rider. Rider is a 38.5 to a 40-point underdog, and your total is between 131.5 to a 132.5, and I did set a total here of a 135. I do like the over. This is a number that is being pile-driven downward, as Houston opened up with a total of more around about a 136. 6, and I just think that Houston is going to be able to do a lot of this work on the total by themselves. As for Houston right now, their shooting is collective only about 28.5% from 3. You know that that's going to be going northward. Milo Suzan is only shooting 23% from the outside with about 9 points per contest after last season. He shot 43% from 3, 11.5 points, 3 boards, 4.5 assists per game. So that's going to be going up against a Rider team that, let's call it what it is. Rider has not only been bad on offense. Right now, Rider is well outside the top 285 in terms of points scored on a per possession basis, but this is also a unit that has been pretty brutal with regards to their defense. Now, obviously, Houston outside the top 350 in terms of total possessions per game last year, number 1 in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis, but Rider 357th in the country in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. And now for Houston, you've got Kingston Flemings, who's been able to give you 17 points per game. He's shooting 40% from 3. He's been able to give the team 5.5 assists per game, and this is a Houston team playing slightly faster than they did a season ago. Now, other than the game against Auburn, they've just really pounded teams into dust. Oakland scores 45 points, Towson scores 48, and Lehigh a nice hearty 57. So that it's going to be a case where you're going to need Houston to do a lot of the work by themselves, but I do think that they're going to be able to do so. And for Rider, they looked a little bit more respectable when they went up against Texas. Now, for Rider, it's been a rough go over for them on offense. It's right now they're averaging only about 64 points per contest, but you've got Zion Cruz back from a season ago. He's been pairing up well with Flash Burton for Cruz. He's able to give you 10.5 points per game after he did so last season, and last year was a high 30s three-point shooter. Right now he's shooting just 26% from three-point range. We should see a little bit of positivity there for this Rider team. It's just big that they lose Tariq Ingram and Effie West Ingram, pair of guys that were able to do a nice job down low for this team. As right now you've only got 2 guys that are giving you over 4 rebounds per game, with the main man being Caleb Smith, who only stands 6'5". He's been able to get the team 9 points, 8 rebounds per game. He's going to be bludgeoned down low by Joseph Tugler, and then you've got Mohamed Diallo, who's been able to give you about 5.5 rebounds per game, true 7-footer that comes on in from the non-D1 ranks. I do think that it's going to be rough for this Rider team. I think that they lose, and they lose convincingly, but I also do think that this total has went a little bit too low, and I do think that there's positivity with the three-point shooting of both of these teams, as both have been shooting less than 29% from three-pointers. So set a total of a 135. I do like the over, and with Houston, just how slowly they play, I think that they're going to have a tough time covering this number. Set my line at 37, so we'll take those points to go along with the over. 7:43, 7:44 on the card. It is Troy, and they're going to be on the road against USC. USC an 18.5 point favor. 156.5 is the total, and with this one, I did set USC as a 19.5 point favorite. I'm going to be one to lay it. Troy, a nice triumph a few nights ago over San Diego State. That was a San Diego State team that, 1, was banged up, and 2, that is a game that I think might take a lot out of them, as that went to multiple overtimes. So you've got a Troy team that has been able to do a relatively solid job in terms of generating turnovers. Last year, they were a top 50 team in terms of turnovers forced on a per possession basis. They're back there once again this season, even though they do lose Shaden Conaway from a season ago. They've really been looking to Thomas Stout to do a bit of everything: a block, 1.5 steals, 11 boards, 16 points per contest, and this is an improved team with their three-point shooting from a year ago, but I'm wondering how much regression we might be seeing, because last year, Troy, outside the top 320 in terms of their three-point shooting percentage, right now shooting about 36% from 3, but they've also allowed their opponents to shoot 37% from three-point range. So I do think that that leads to a little bit of intrigue with regards to total. Now, set mine at a 157, because I do believe that this is going to be a USC team that's going to be a little bit higher octane than they were a year ago. You go back to Eric Musselman and the heyday teams that he had over at Arkansas. Those were teams that were really looking to push the tempo. Right now for USC, they are 26th in the country in terms of total possessions per game, and I just think that they've got much more in the backcourt than this Troy team, even though Troy has found Cooper Campbell, who's been able to do a nice job throwing out about 4.3 assists per contest. You've got on the flip side for this USC team a guy in Chad Baker-Mazara that's in about his 500th year of college basketball. He's done a good job leading the way with 18.5 points, 6 boards per contest, and Rodney Rice, who comes on over from Maryland, similar numbers, 18.5 points, 6 boards, but he's throwing in their 7.5 assists per game. Now, I recognize that USC has been facing some, shall we say, outgunned competition to begin this season, but they have absolutely taken it to the likes of an Illinois State, who's very rock solid, Manhattan, Cal Poly, so I do think that that's a very encouraging sign, and this has been a unit that has done a good job in terms of generating second and third chances, as well as you bring in Jacob Kofi, 6'10" big man that's able to pop a few threes, comes in from Virginia. I know that he dealt with injury last year, so getting back Terrence Williams, that's big for them as well, so you just have so much depth, and then if you need to look a little bit more down low, Gabe Dines was one of the top shot blockers in all of college basketball at over 7 feet tall. I think that that's just a little bit too much for Troy to take, as they're out there on a pretty long West Coast road trip and coming off of a double overtime game. So my total 157.5 at a 157 or less. I'd like the over and want to lay up to 19 here with USC. 745, 746 on the card. It is St.Joh's. They hope to not be average Joes as they're on the road against UNLV. UNLV's an 8.5 point favorite. Total is 157.5 and set a line of 3.5. I'm going to be willing to take the points with St.Joh's. I know that for St.Joh's, it has not necessarily been a great start to the season. They lose as a favorite to Penn a few days ago, but it's not been a good year for this UNLV team either. Like for UNLV, they have lost twice at home as a more than 8-point favorite against Montana and then against UT Martin to begin the season, and that's because they're dealing with so many injuries. Miles Shea has yet to hit the floor. He was that transfer from UC Irvine that gave them double figures. Emmanuel Stephen, the 7-footer from Arizona, he's dealing with injury, and now Lajal Delbele, hopefully I said that correct, who comes in from Iowa. He was giving the team some starts. He's out of the fold. Now, despite that, they were able to get a win over Memphis, but seeing this Memphis team be a little bit disjointed, they had 18 turnovers in that game, Memphis did, so that's a little bit less than amazing. And for UNLV, offense has been solid. They've been a top 60 team in terms of points scored on a per possession basis, with really pounding it inside. You've had Dre Gibbs-Lawhorn supply the team with 15 points per contest. I know that he's dealt with a little bit of injury, but Isaac Williamson, he's come in. He's been able to give the team 36 points in the 2 games that he's played this far this season, but the team has also turned the ball over about 13.5 times per game as they've really been looking for that main point guard. It's sort of been by committee. And then for St.Joh's, I think that they take advantage of the over-aggressiveness that you got from UNLV. UNLV's outside the top 345 in terms of fouls committed on a per-possession basis. They're giving up a lot of fouls, and St.Joh's, currently, they're outside the top 230 in terms of points scored on a per-possession basis, but they've done one thing well. They are shooting 81.9% at the free throw line, so a team in UNLV that fouls a ton, that's going to be able to help them out quite a bit. For St.Joh's, they do need to hunker down a little bit more on defense. They've been allowing opponents to shoot 36% from 3. They've been quite a bit better on the interior with having a guy, Justice Ajabor, who gave the team multiple blocks per contest back. He's only given them 2 points per game, but he's also been able to give them darn near 2 blocks per contest. So you've got Jaden Glover, who comes over after he just couldn't get out there on the floor over at St. John's, but highly touted prospect. Deuce Jones, he was one of the better freshmen out there in the Atlantic 10 last season over at LaSalle, 12.5 points, 3 assists, 3.5 per contest, so good versatility there. And it's been a little bit of a changeover, having to change to the Steve Donahue style. St. Joe's is looking to go a little bit more up-tempo. UNLV has been about a top 50 team in terms of total possessions per game, but I do think that there's going to be a little bit of sloppiness with UNLV turning the ball over 13.5 times per game. It's a St. Joe's team that is currently shooting 25.5% from 3. That should be going northward, but that said, I set a little bit of lower total here to 155.5. I do think that for St. Joe's, they do a nice job being able to defend inside with those shot blocks, and I do think that UNLV sees a bit of regression with that offense down low, so I'm going to be willing to take the points here with St. Joe's, and I'm going to be in on this total under as well. 747, 748 on the betting board. It is Hawaii, and they play us Arizona State. Arizona State and our random college basketball game in Hawaii are between 1.5 to 2 point underdogs. This game is 148.5, and 2 or more is my buy point on Arizona State. I did set them as a 1.5 point underdog. It's been a little bit of a tumultuous start for Arizona State, but they played some good competition. I will say the Georgia State scare was on SC2 amazing, but I'm losing at home to Gonzaga. No real shame there. Mo Odom is a really good point guard. He spent time at Pepperdine and Pacific the last 2 seasons where he gave both of those teams 4+ assists per contest. As a matter of fact, he had over 6 assists per game last season, and he's come in, he's been able to run the show with about 15 points, 7.5 assists, shooting over 40% from 3, which I think is going to see a little bit of regression, but you've also got a star freshman down low and 7'1" Masamba Diop, who's been able to do a nice job giving you nearly 2 blocks. He's doing a great job down low, and that should be big against a Hawaii team that last year was in the top 25 with regards to their rebound percentage, and they bring in Isaac Johnson. He was a starter over at Utah State a few seasons ago, true 7-footer that's been able to really keep that roar going down low. Hawaii's always been a little bit suspect with their 3-point shooting. They're shooting about 32% from the outside this season, and Hawaii traditionally is outside the top 250 in terms of total possessions per game. They've been a little bit faster this year, but they played a pair of hair-breaking games against Mississippi Valley State along with East Texas A&M, where there was like 100 billion fouls being called. You go back night number 1, that was a 60-59 slog against Oregon, and I do think that this team at their core, they're a little bit more slow. We saw that against Utah Tech. That was more of a 68-62 game, and you bring back Yatis Nemishka, who was the lead scorer for them a season ago with about 12 points per contest. Not necessarily a great 3-point shooter, but just does a little bit of this and that. He'll give you 5 rebounds per game, and Harry Ruyadev, he's a guy that returns from a season ago as well. He's been able to supply this team with 12 points, but still with a little bit of injury. He's already missed a game this season. I do think that for Arizona State, they do a nice job holding in there. It's a lot of travel, but at the very very least, they're going from the West Coast on out to Hawaii, not going from like the East Coast or something like that. And I do believe that with having Diop down low, that allows them to remain lively. Said Hawaii is a very slim favorite with this being on the island of a 1.5. So 2+ won't take the points with Arizona State. Made a total of a 147.5. So I'm in on the 148 plus under. 749, 750 on the card. Now we go to the Bahamas. Neutral court game between Purdue and Memphis. Memphis is a 14.5 to a 15.5 point underdog. Total on this game between 158.5 to a 159.5. And I did set a total here of a 159. Personally, I would rather take a 158.5 over rather than a 159.5 under. You've got Memphis currently outside the top 125 in terms of points scored on a per possession basis. Much of that has been due to turnovers. They had 18 turnovers in that unsightly loss that they took against UNLV. I think this is a bounce back spot for them, though. I set this line at 9. I'm going to be willing to take the points. I recognize that Memphis has always had some turnover woes, but I do think that these guys are going to be able to click. You've got Sincere Parker and Doug McDaniel in the backcourt. Pair of guys I think are going to be very rock solid. Parker, a few seasons ago when he was over at St. Louis, he was like a 15-point per game scorer when he was healthy. Doug McDaniel, I recognize that the teams that he's been on have not necessarily been winning teams, that he's currently shooting 20% from 3. That should be going northward, but he's been able to give the team 5.5 assists per game. And then you've got Aaron Bradshaw, who's a former top 20 recruit that stands 7 feet tall, that has the versatility to be able to pop it from 3-point range. This is a unit that is going to need to hunker down a little bit more down low, but it's not as if this Purdue team has been monsters of the midway with regards to their defense. They're currently about 166th in the country in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis and just 345th in terms of turnovers forced on a per possession basis. So that main kryptonite that you've got with this Memphis team, that is going to be masked a little bit more. You do have a guy that I really like in Braden Smith that does just such an amazing job in the backcourt. Right now 18 points, 5 boards, 8.5 assists per contest, and then Fletcher Lawyer off the ball over the last 2 years. He shot 40+% from 3-point range, currently shooting 50% from 3. We should see that go downward a little bit, but 17 points per contest out of him. This is a Purdue team that's even better down low because everyone talks about Oscar Clough, who led all of college basketball in terms of rebounding last year, but Daniel Jacobson is a 7'4" big man that dealt with injury last season. He's back. Liam Murphy, who's been dealing with a little bit of an ailment, when he's been out there on the floor, he's been solid as well. And for Purdue, they're a little bit of the opposite of Memphis. With Purdue last year, they were actually outside the top 3 in terms of total possessions per game. They're a little bit more mid-tempo this season, but that's because they had that game against Alabama that warps the numbers a little bit. And for Memphis, 72nd in the country in terms of total possessions per game. I think they get a mid-tempo game, and typically the sidelines at the Bahamas are actually pretty good. So instead of Joe of 159, I'm going to be in on the over, but I think that Memphis bounces back after that bad loss against UNLV. Set my line at 9. I'm going to be willing to take those points. 751, 752 on the card. The other game from the Bahamas, you've got Texas Tech taking on Wake Forest, and Wake Forest does find themselves as a underdog of 8 to 8.5 points. 157.5 to 158.5 is the total, and I did set Texas Tech as a 9-point favorite. I'm going to be willing to lay the 8 to 8.5 with them. It's a Wake Forest team that got online with their offense against UMass Lowell, but UMass Lowell is right now one of the worst teams in all of college basketball. And for Wake Forest, last year they shot about 30% as a collective from 3-point range. They're currently shooting about 32.5% from the outside. Juke Harris has been that main guy with about 22 points, shooting in the mid-30s from 3-point range, but still very fair to have some question marks. Nate Kalmezi has been able to shoot 46% from 3 to begin the season, but last year when he was over at Washington State and 2 years ago when he was at Washington, shot less than 30% from distance at both of those places. And last year when he was running the show over at Washington State, he was turning the ball over 3 times per game. That's a little bit of a concern as Wake Forest has been turning the ball over about 12.5 times per contest. Wake Forest built much more on the inside than they have been in past years. Ravon Spillers is in year number 2 with the system, 6.5 boards. It's a nice job in terms of being able to grab rebounds for second and third chances. You bring in Cooper Schwieger, who I didn't think that he was the big difference maker that a lot of people made him out to be, and right now that has been the case. Last year over at Valparaiso, 16 points, 8 boards per contest, just 4.3 rebounds per game, but he does give you a little bit of depth down low. And Omaha Blue is a nice upside guy as well, but for Texas Tech, they should be able to own the glass because you got a guy in JT Toppin that can go off for a double-double on any given night. We have seen him be the main man for this team once again this season with over 24 points per contest, and Christian Anderson has been able to give the backcourt leadership, and this team really does come and go as he does. He had a rough game in their loss against Illinois, and that's a big reason why they lost it because LaJuan Watts has been rock solid coming over from Washington State, 14 14 points, 6.5 boards. He's able to bomb it from 3. And for Texas Tech right now, as a collective, they're shooting 38% from the outside. Anderson needs to keep things relatively clean and efficient, and I do think that he's going to be able to do so against a defense here in Wake Forest that really doesn't force the issue in terms of generating turnovers. I do think that Texas Tech is going to be able to win from within, and their perimeter defense has been great as well, allowing opponents to shoot less than 29% from the outside. I did set a total here of a 153. It does seem like Wake Forest is going to be maybe pushing tempo a little bit more, but they've never really been a warp speed team. The reason why they're currently 9th in the country in terms of total possessions per game is that they had that overtime game against Michigan, and then you've got a Texas Tech team that traditionally is more of a mid-tempo team. They've been right there this year, so set a total of 153. I like the under, and I'm going to be willing to lay it here with Texas Tech. 753, 754 on the card. It is Nebraska, and they play against New Mexico. This is from the T-Mobile Center out there in Missouri, and Nebraska is a 6.5 to a 7-point favorite. 151.5 to 152.5 is the total, and Nebraska certainly has a little bit more of the crowd on their side with where the game is located, but that said, I set my line at 4.5. I'm going to be willing to take the points with New Mexico. New Mexico hired on Eric Olin from UC San Diego in the offseason, and he has instantly been able to just have his system take hold here. Right now, his team is 31st in the country in terms of points per possession allowed, and they are doing a great job, much like his team did over at UC San Diego, of winning the turnover battle last year. That UC San Diego team 4th in the country in terms of turnovers forced on a per possession basis, and right now they are 18th in the country. Now, he didn't necessarily bring over a lot of transfers, but Chris Howell, he's a guy that stayed with the program, and he was a guy that last year would give that team not necessarily a ton of scoring, like 7 or 8 points per game, but he would throw in there 3 assists, a pair of steals per contest. He's done a great job there. And then Dayton Albury, who was a really good scorer over at Queens NC 2 seasons ago, last season over at Utah State, saw some starts, gave that team 8 points. He's a career 38% three-point shooter. He very much fits the system. He's been rock solid, but it's really been the freshmen and Jake Hall along with Tomsley Bulin who have come in. They've been able to combine for about 23 points per contest. New Mexico right now leaving a little bit of something to be desired on the offensive side of things, but that defense with the way that they're generating turnovers has been rock solid. And for Nebraska, they have now given up 66 points or fewer in 3 of their first 4 games this season. They had a hair-brainy game against Oklahoma, but I mean, they're a relatively mid-tempo team right now that is a team that I think should be able to win the battle down low. Rick Bass is back from season ago. He's averaging 15 points, 8 boards, and at 6'9", he's always a relatively good three-point shooter. I don't think he's as good as the current 53% that he's shooting right now, but pretty rock solid. They've really pushed Connor Essegian out of the fold, which Connor Essegian has always been inconsistent going back to his days at Wisconsin. That's addition by subtraction, in my opinion, for this team, as Jamarcus Lawrence has been able to see a few more minutes after he was sort of a yo-yo transfer, began his career in Nebraska, went over to Rhode Island. Now he's back here. He's been able to give this team 9 points per contest, and it is a Nebraska team that I feel like is going to continue to do a relatively good job with their defense. They're a top 60 team in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. They themselves have been turning teams over as well with about 14.5 turnovers per game, so do think that things get a little bit more sloppier, and Nebraska is making sure that teams don't hit the free throw line as well. They're a top 20 team in terms of fewest free throw attempts per game for their opponents, so I do think that you get a little bit more of a calm game here, especially with New Mexico outside the top 225 in terms of total possessions per game. Nebraska right around about 187, so I set a total here of a 144.5. I do like New Mexico with the points, and I'm going to be in on the under. This is the last game on the normal Las Vegas betting board before we get the extra games. Another game from Missouri, as we've got Kansas State going up against Mississippi State. Mississippi State is right now a 2.5 to a 3-point favorite. Total on this game 161.5. I set Kansas State as a favorite. I do like them on the money line. I recognize that for Kansas State, they should see some regression with the fact that they are currently shooting 45.7% from 3-point range, but crowd is certainly going to be on their side in this game, and you've got a bunch in Mississippi State that is really having a tough time taking care of the ball. They're turning the ball over 16 times per game, 324th in the country in terms of turnovers on a per possession basis. The 3-point shooting has been a little bit better. You bring back Josh Hubbard from a season ago. He's been able to supply this team with 17 plus points per contest, but in every year under Chris Jans, Mississippi State has ended the year being 270th or worse with regards to that 3-point shooting. Again, I think that goes northward. A little bit of a revenge game for him after he only played 7 games for Kansas State a season ago. 2 years ago over at Samford was a 16-point per game scorer, shot over 40% from 3. Jabari McGee over at UAB was a 40% 3-point shooter, so they give this team a little bit of lift, but that said, with this bunch as well, they're allowing opponents to shoot just 24.2% from 3-point range. That's going to be going northward. With Mississippi State last year, they were actually 301st in the country in terms of opponents' 3-point shooting percentage, so while there's going to be negative regression with Kansas State's 3-point shooting, there's going to also be negative regression with Mississippi State's 3-point shooting defense. defense. And for Kansas State, they're doing a much better job of being able to generate turnovers. Mississippi State, despite the fact that they're turning the ball over as much as they are, they're just 300th in the country in terms of turnovers forced on a per possession basis. Kansas State, while they're not like generating a billion turnovers or anything like that, they're more around about 142nd, and I think that they've got the best player on the floor in PJ Haggerty, who's right now averaging 26 points, 5 boards, 6 assists, shooting 40% from 3. David Castillo's right now shooting 61% from 3. That's going to be going downward, but he's been rock solid, giving this team 13 points per game, and it's all about, can this team be able to do a rock solid job down low? And I think that the answer is yes. With Nate Johnson give you a little bit of everything right now, 14 points, 7 boards, a guy that's not afraid to get his nose dirty, coming on over from Akron. You don't necessarily have the size that you had from a season ago when they tried out some of those guys like Ogana Iesu or in company, but I feel like they're getting a little bit of good production as well out of Kamari McGriff, a guy that's been around the block, was last year over at UNC Wilmington. He stepped in, he's been able to give the team 4.5 boards, 13.5 points per game. Not a guy that's really going to go bombs away from 3-point range, but in the end, I do think that Kansas State finds a way to be able to get the job done. It's pretty clear that this Kansas State team is looking to push a little bit more tempo than they did a season ago, but it's not like they're necessarily a warp speed sort of team. This is a Kansas State punch in terms of total possessions per game right now. They're checking in about 54th in all of college basketball. And for Mississippi State, they've sort of been up, down, all around about 112th in the country in terms of total possessions per game. So made a total of 157. I think that the turnovers cost you an over. I like the under and Kansas State on the money line. And now we hit the extra games.
The normal betting board picks are complete, but there are some extra games today, so we go into the bonus.
306-601, 306-602. You've got UNC Greensboro on the road against Queens NC, and Queens NC is a favorite here of 6 points. Total on this game, it is a 152, and I did set Queens NC as an 8-point favorite. I'm going to be willing to lay it. Seeing a 6.5 out there as well, I would still be willing to lay the 6.5 as well. For UNC Greensboro, just so many moving pieces from a season ago. They lose pretty much 9 of their top 10 scores from a season ago. I think that they pretty much lose their top 8, as the main holdover from a season ago, that'd be Damas Kazunis, who's been able to give you about 4 boards, 6 points per contest, but it's been guys coming up from the lower level like a Justin Neely, who's been able to give you a double-figure amount of rebounds, but at 6'5", not necessarily the most imposing big man in the world. Donald Whitehead has been solid with about 13.5 points per game since he came on up from the non-D1 ranks, but it's not like they brought in a lot of firepower from the non-D1 level. They do bring up Valentin Pinedo. He missed the first few games of the season. He was a solid player over at St. Francis, Pennsylvania, but not necessarily an elevator. Greensboro the last 2 seasons was a top 75 team in terms of 3-point shooting percentage, and they lose pretty much all of that. And for Queens NC right now, they're shooting about 34.5% from 3. I do think that this is actually going to go northward a little bit. Chris Ashby is a rock solid player. He and Yoav Bervin have both been able to give between 14 to 15 points per contest. Right now with Ashby, he's been able to give you 43.5% 3-point shooting. For Queens NC, a big key for them is being able to limit the north of 15 turnovers per game that they've been committing, but I do think that they're going to be able to do so against a Greensboro team that has been in quite a bit of transition. You've got down low Avante Parker, I think is going to be able to win the battle down low. He's been able to supply about 9 points, only about 3.5 rebounds per game, but you go back to what he did over at Georgia Southern 2 seasons ago, and that season he gave that team 5.5 boards, a steal, a block per contest, so he does a nice job fitting the system, playing a little bit more up-tempo as a big man, and there's Schwieger's all over the place. This one, Carson Schwieger, has been rock solid with about 7 points, 3.5 rebounds per game. This is not quite the same shot-blocking team that they were a season ago when you had Malcolm Wilson out there, but that's it for Queens NC. High-octane offense, a team that's going to be looking to push tempo in the top 75 in terms of total possessions per game. Greensboro, very much a slower team. They're typically outside the top 275 in terms of total possessions per game, but I think that Queens NC gets things cranked up. I think that this has a propensity to be close enough for late game felling, so made a 154 total. I like the over, and Queens NC up to minus 7.5. 306-603, 306-604. Vanderbilt is playing against Texas Southern. Texas Southern, a 36.5 point dog, totals between 168 to a 168.5, and I did set Texas Southern as a 32.5 point underdog. I'm going to be willing to take the points. Now, this is a Vanderbilt team I think is one of the best teams in all of college basketball. The way that this has been built under Mark Byington has been pretty incredible. The backcourt play is great. Duke Miles, he has come in. He's been able to give the team 16 points, 5.5 assists per game. Tyler Nickel was a rock solid scorer last season. He's stepped that up this year as both Tylers, he and Tyler Harris, are both giving you between 14 to 15 points apiece. And for Vanderbilt last season, they had a little bit of an issue in terms of giving up open 3-point looks. They've had a little bit of an issue there this season, but the rebounding is much better. You bring back your main rebounder from last season, Devin McLaughlin, who's been able to give you between 7 to 8 rebounds per game, much like last season, but now you add in there a little bit more with being able to have Jalen Washington from North Carolina come in there as well. So they've got a great 8 to 9 man rotation. And for Texas Southern, I do think that they hold in there a little bit because you look at night number 1 and the way that they got Lion Basin against Gonzaga, and ever since then, they've had some nice bounce backs. They lose to Texas State, but they keep that game within 10. They were very competitive against Stanford. This is a Texas Southern team that has been looking to run a little bit more. They're in the top 100 right now in terms of total possessions per game, and Vanderbilt, they're about 108th in the country in terms of total possessions per game. So not two teams that are playing at warp speed, but they're teams that are looking to speed it up a little bit. But after Texas Southern had an uncharacteristically bad year on the glass last year, they bring in Troy Hoopstead, who 2 years ago over at Maryland Eastern Shore was a really good 7+ rebound per game guy for them. Last year just didn't see a lot of minutes over at UT Arlington. Now he's come in, he's been able to get the team 8 rebounds per game, exactly what the doctor ordered there. And Zion Hayes was dealing with a little bit of injury to begin the season. That's a big reason why they had some lackluster performances. He's come back in the last few games, and he's been rock solid with 28 points in those 2 games as well. Need to get a bit more of Zatarius Moultrie, who has really regressed in his time over at Texas Southern, but having these guys back from a season ago, like a Kobe Granger, even though he hasn't been able to deliver much, he gives you some solid defense. And then Alex Anderson, I think, is going to be able to help this team out as well. Was limited to 10 games due to injury last year and dealt with some injury over at Incarnate Word as well. But last we saw him for a full season over at Alabama State, 2022-23 season in the SWAC. 10 points, 3 assists, steal per contest. Not an amazing three-point shooter, but gives his team just a little bit more there. And this is a Vanderbilt team that does a great job of generating turnovers. Right now, top 50 team in terms of turnovers forced on a per possession basis. Texas Southern, 15.5 turnovers per game. Not doing the little things well. They're shooting only 62% of the free throw line, but they're much better on the glass than they were in previous seasons. I do think that that's just enough for them to hold in there in a big number and really get you this under. 164.5 is what I set my total at, so like the under and the points here with Texas Southern. 306.605, 306.606. Long Island is going to be on the road taking on Fordham. Fordham opened up as a pick'em, but that had like minus 125 juice on it. Now they're a minus 3 favorite, and your total on this game, it is 153, and I set a low total here of a 143.5. I'm going to be in on the under with this Fordham team. They're just not really playing with a lot of tempo right now. Mike Magpayo, he comes on over from UC Riverside, and if you look at the final few seasons over at Riverside, they were more of a mid-tempo / slightly below mid-tempo team, but I mean, in the early goings, it was a very slow style when he just got it going, and I think that Fordham is going to be the exact same right now. 351st in the country in terms of total possessions per game. Now, LIU is much faster than they were a season ago, currently 57th in the country in terms of total possessions per game. A little bit of a byproduct of the competition that they have been playing. They played that game against IU India, that just completely warps the numbers, and for LIU last year, they were outside the top 275 in terms of total possessions per game, and I do think that they're going to be faster this year. You bring back Malachi Davis and Jamal Fuller, your 2 main double-figure scorers from the backcourt, and you add in their Greg Gecko-Gordon. Couldn't get out there on the floor over at UB last year, but 2 years ago over at Iona, 16-point per game guy that would give you about 7 boards, a steal and a half per contest, and he's just a good conduit for offense. And then they bring in Isaiah Miranda, who at 7'1", he actually had a 3 that he made in that game against IU Indy. It's like the only 3 that he's made thus far this season, but he's able to give this team a little bit of size, 7 points per game, but he's not really pulling in a lot of rebounds. Other than Shadrick Lassou, you don't have a lot of rock-solid rebounders, and he last year gave the team 7 rebounds. He's down to about 3.5 per contest, so it's been a little bit up, down, all around for a Long Island team that is currently outside the top 320 in terms of ball security and shooting just 53% of the free throw line, and that's a big reason why I did side with Fordham. I know that things have been less than savory for them. You lose at home to begin the season over at NJIT, and then they pull out that game against Wagner, but that was an absolute slog. But you bring in DeJoe Reeves, a nice 15 point per game scorer over at Iona. Zariq Nutter is a guy that was Mr. Do-It-All both at Northern Illinois and Georgia State. Last year at Georgia State, 14 points, mid 33-point shooter, 3 boards, 2 assists. I do like his overall game, and I do think that Fordham going to be able to find their bearings a little bit more. They've been preventing really giving up a lot of turnovers, and they're doing a great job of owning the glass. Right now, they're a top 25 team in terms of defensive rebound percentage. Opponents are only averaging 6.6 rebounds per game, and I think that this is going to be a slower game that Fordham really controls the tenor of. I set Fordham as a 5.5 point favorite. I'm going to be willing to lay that number, and I like the under. 306.607, 306.608. Mercyhurst is on the road against Miami of Ohio. Miami of Ohio does find themselves as 16 to 17 point favorites. So 142 is the total, and with this total, I did set mine at a 150.5. I do like the over. You do have a Mercyhurst team that was outside the top 300 in terms of total possessions per game last year. They're also outside the top 300 in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. I do think that they're a little bit better this year on defense. You saw them be able to have that triumph over Loyola Chicago, but that's a Loyola Chicago team I think is going to be brutal moving forward. And for Miami of Ohio, typically a mid-tempo team. Right now they're about 219th in the country in terms of total possessions per game, but this is a Miami of Ohio team that's able to go inferno mode from three-point range. And for Mercyhurst, right now allowing opponents to shoot 26% from three-point range. Again, I think that that's a little bit of a warped number. They play against a few non-Division I teams, a Morgan State team that really doesn't bomb it from three, and Loyola Chicago just can't find their bearings in general. You've got Bernie Blunt back, though, for Mercyhurst. He last year was one of their main scorers. He supplied that team with about 12.5 points, shot in the mid to high 30s from three-point range. He's right now giving the team 18 points, 2.5 assists per game, so he's doing a good job leading the charge. The rest of the pieces are relatively new, other than Mikolas Ivanauskis, who he's been able to give you a bit of versatility at 6'8", 9.5 points, 6.5 boards. He's able to pop it a little bit from three-point range, but with Miami of Ohio, I do think that they are going to be able to break a Mercyhurst team that to this point has been pretty solid in terms of their three-point shooting defense, but you bring back a pair of guys in Peter Seward along with Brent Byers from a season ago to really get going. Byers shot over 40% from three and a little bit more of an ancillary role, and Peter Seward, he was that main holdover from a season ago where he gave the team 13.5 points, mid-33-point shooter, 3 assists, 5 rebounds, just does a good job in terms of being able to dole out good, clean offense. And for this Miami of Ohio team, are they going to leave a little bit of something to be desired down low? Yes, but you bring back Antoine Wolffork down low from a season ago, and bringing in Elmar Atlison, I thought was a great get from Bradley. Last year as a part-time starter at about 6'8", 6'9", 5.5 points, high 33-point shooter, just fits the system really well. Mercyhurst has been a nice surprise beginning the season, but I do think that the overall depth of Miami of Ohio, bringing in a guy like an Ian Elmore as well, who's able to be a nice solid scorer after last season. He gave the team right around about 11 points as a starter. He was able to shoot 40% from three. He's taken on a bit more of an ancillary role with the way that they have mixed and shaked with this lineup. I do think that Miami of Ohio does find a way to get the job done. I set this line at 18.5, so I'm going to be willing to lay it with Miami of Ohio, and I do like the over as well. Semi-total 150.5, 36.609, 36.610. Marshall plays us Arkansas Pine Bluff. Pine Bluff is a 19.5 point underdog. 165 is the total, and I did set a line of a 21.5. I'm going to be willing to lay it. The big reason why is that Pine Bluff has actually covered some numbers, and this is a Pine Bluff team that is much more respectable than they were in past seasons. That said, they now have to go up against Matthew Von Kamen, who stands 7'4", over at Elon last year. He only gave the team 6 points per contest, but 7.8 rebounds, over 2.5 blocks per game. There's just not the size on this Pine Bluff team to be able to match that. Now you bring in Yaquan Scott, who was over at UT San Antonio last year, meet for the Roadrunners. He, in a small 6-game sample size as he was limited injury, 7.5 points, 4.5 boards, shot 40% plus from three-point range. You do like his game. And then Keon Williams, he was actually the top scorer over at Abilene Christian, gets kicked off the team in August, needs a landing spot. He was able to get that from Arkansas Pine Bluff after last year. 13.5 points, 5 boards, 2.5 assists, steal per contest, mid-33-point shooter over at Abilene Christian. Like those guys, what you get around them is a big question mark, though. Milan Charles, he's a guy that comes on over from France. He's been able to give you about 9 points per contest. They've been dealing with some injuries, like having out of the fold a guy in Jamari Hamilton Brown, who is a pretty highly touted guy from the non-D1 ranks. That's been hurting them a little bit. And then for Marshall, you bring back one of your main guards from a season ago in Jalen Spear, and he's been spearheading the offense with 6 assists, 11 points per contest. But Noah Ushuru, who comes over from the non-D1 ranks, he's from Canada, and I'm sure that I butchered that name. He's been able to do a nice job supplying 12 points, 5 boards, 5 assists, steal and per contest. And this is a Marshall team that now in year number 2 under Cornelius Jackson, they are very much embracing versatility. They've been looking to go down low a little bit more on Wyatt Franks, who he's been with the program for a few seasons. He's really been able to ascend, give this team 5.5 rebounds at 6'9". He's able to pop it from three, career about 30% three-point shooter, but also having a guy in Caleb Hellenbeck come on up from the non-D1 ranks. If I'm not mistaken, his brother currently plays for Idaho State. Those are two guys out there in more of the mountainous part of the country. He's been able to elevate as well for a Marshall team that last year had a rough go of it from three-point range. Right now, they're shooting as a collective 38% from three. The 17.5 turnovers per game are a little bit of an issue, but now you're facing off against a Pine Bluff team that, let's call it what it is, not generating a lot of defensive pressure outside the top 300 in terms of their points allowed on a per possession basis, not generating a lot of turnovers. And I do think that Marshall takes it to a Pine Bluff team that's currently outside the top 350 in terms of opponents' 2-point shooting percentage. So I did set a line here of 21.5. I'm going to be willing to lay with Marshall, and I did set a total here of a 155.5. We're really seeing this Pine Bluff team slow down. Last year they were in the top 30 in terms of their total possessions per game. Pine Bluff this season closer to about 76th in the country in terms of total possessions per game, and gone are the days of Dan and Tony for Marshall. They've been slowing down just a skoja bit as well. They're about 44th in the country right now in terms of total possessions per game. So I'm going to be willing to dive in on this total under, and I'm going to be willing to lay it with Marshall. 3 at 6-6-11, 3 at 6-6-12. You've got Bucknell, and they're going to be on the road against St. John's, and St. John's does find themselves as 31 to 31 9-point favorites. 154.5 is the total. I set a line of 30.5, so 31 plus does become my buy point on Bucknell. Bucknell is coming off of a rough loss against Pittsburgh, and I do have quite a few moving parts, but for Bucknell, I do like what you've been able to get out of Amon Doris, who's come in as a freshman from the country of Germany. 14 points, 5 boards. Doesn't have quite the versatility of Noah Williamson, as he's attempting to pop threes. He's only shooting about 23% from 3, but that's a good way to replace a true 7-footer that heads to Alabama. Brandon McCreesh needs to step up in the backcourt. He was expected to be a top scorer for the team, only give you about 5 points per contest, and Rui Bejier, who he's been in the program for a few years, he's been able to give you 13 points, 5 boards per contest, and Angele Spandone has been able to do a solid job. Give the team 9 points per game, but outside that main starting 5, you haven't been able to get a lot out of the likes of a Quinn Berger, who comes over from St.Joh's over the last few seasons. And for Slick Rick Pitino, obviously that loss that the team took to Alabama, a little bit less than savory, but this team looks very much ascended with regards to their offense. They're only shooting 31% from 3, but they've got the pieces that'll be much better moving forward. Jusan Sadan is shooting over 40% from 3. Comes in from Arizona State. He's given the team 12 points per contest. Dylan Mitchell was a rock-solid rebounder the last few seasons over at Texas. He's been able to help out Zuji Ejiofor, as these two guys have been able to combine for 12 rebounds with Ejiofor last year, 2+ blocks per contest, and Bryce Hopkins looks very much fully recovered from the injury that held him out of just so much of the back half of the 2023-24 season and pretty much all of last year as well. 14 points, 4 boards, and when he was at full force over at Providence 3 years ago, that was an 8.5 rebound, 16 point per game guy that shot in the high 30s from 3-point range. St. John's should be able to get it done, but keep in mind St. John's very much a defense-oriented team last year. They were in the top 5 in terms of their points allowed on a per possession basis, but also a very fast team in the top 30 in terms of total possessions per game. And in comparison to Patriot League standards, Bucknell is one of the more up-tempo teams in that conference. Right now, about 280th in terms of total possessions per game. Last year, they were in the top 150. I do think that you get a little bit more pace in this game. I do think that St. John's sees that 3-point shooting go up. So, set a total of 156.5. I like the over. And Bucknell, I'm willing to take them at 31 plus here. 3 of 6-6-13, 3 of 6-6-14. Chicago State is on the road against Iowa. Iowa, a pretty sizable favorite here of 32 to 33 points. Total on this game, it is 150. Set a line of 29.5. I'm going to be willing to take the points with Chicago State. Chicago State has actually had some respectable efforts recently. They don't have any wins, but I did like the fact that in the offseason they had a great coaching hire, bringing in Landon Busey, who always felt like did more with less over at Elkhorn State, and he brings back one of those top scorers with him from Elkhorn State, Marcus Sankersley, who's been able to give this team right now 17 points per game. It's a bunch of Chicago State that's only shooting about 29% from 3-point range, and this is going to be a team that loses a battle down low. You don't have a lot of size other than Stephen Byard, who's been able to give you only about 10 points, 3.5 rebounds per game. Matter of fact, you don't have a single guy on the roster that's giving you more than 4 boards per contest. They've been negatively impacted by the fact that Deshaun Jean-Charles feels like he's been dealing with a little bit of an injury. He's played in 3 games, but last year he was a nice ancillary piece for the Chicago State team, and he dealt with injuries 2 seasons ago. It feels like those are popping up once again for him. And for Iowa, this is not necessarily a team that's gunning it, but they are a little bit faster than they were a season ago under Ben McCollum. They're obviously slower than they are under Frank McCaffrey, but in comparison to Ben McCollum's Drake team from a season ago, this is a team that sped things up, as that Drake team was dead last in the country in terms of possessions per game per 40 minutes. This year, Iowa about 332nd in terms of total possessions per game, but a top 20 team in terms of points scored on a per possession basis, as Alvaro Fogarius was over at Robert Morris as a 6'9" stretch player. He's done a nice job elevating this team. 12 points, 6 boards. He's shooting 50% from 3. Bennett Sturts, Mr. Do-It-All from last season, 20 points, 6 assists, 2 steals. He has been incredible for this team as well. And then someone like Cam Manny Wu is able to do a good job, give you some nice rebounding. Cale Combs, he comes over from Drake as well. Not much of like a explosive scorer, but he's been solid. And they're doing all this with Brendan Housen only giving you like 5.5 points per contest, and he's expected to be a really good scorer. But that said, this is a Chicago State team that they're just doing a good job of being able to hang around in some of these games. They were able to give St. Louis a little bit of a run for their money. They held in there against Minnesota. They lose by 4 against Illinois, Chicago, and it feels like after they got bludgeoned on defense in their first few games of the season, they're starting to slow things down. They realize that they're not necessarily too big, but they're doing a better job with that perimeter defense, and I think does just enough to keep them lively here. Now, Iowa is really efficient on offense, so I did set my total at a 151.5 here at the 150. I do like the over, but I'm going to be willing to take those points with Chicago State. 306-615, 306-616. You've got Cornell playing against Colgate. Colgate is a 4-point underdog as they look for a minty fresh cover, and your total is 165, and set a total here of a 163. I do like the under. It does feel like Colgate is starting to restore the roar with their three-point shooting. They typically are a top 50 team with their three-point shooting percentage. That was down last year after they lost just so many pieces, and for Colgate, they're not much of an up-tempo team. 328th in terms of total possessions per game. Cornell traditionally is a very up-tempo team right now, 50th in the country in terms of total possessions per game. I think that you get something between A and B. I don't think that Cornell necessarily gets their super fast style. I don't think that Colgate gets their super slow style, and for Colgate, they've got a do-it-all guy in Jalen Cox. They have like 16 points, 5 boards, 4.5 assists per contest. You always have one of those. Going back to Jordan Burns, Braden Smith, guys like that, so you do like to be able to see that, and Sam Wright at 6'8" has provided good versatility, 15.5 points. He's able to shoot in the mid-30s from 3, supplying the team with about 4 boards per contest, but with Colgate, they just don't give themselves second chances. They're averaging about 5.6 offensive rebounds per game. That's a bottom 15 mark in all of college basketball, so I do think that that costs you a little bit with regards to total, and I did set Cornell as a 5-point favorite because they ascended with regards to their down-low play. Typically, this is not a team that does a great job on the glass, but Casper Sepp, he actually had more rebounds than he had points over at Valparaiso last season. He elevates his team a little bit. Adam Sang-Hin, he's been hitting it hard with giving you 18 points, 3.5 boards, 3.5 assists, and typically Cornell is a little bit of a hole is greater than the sum of its parts teams. They realize that they've got a guy that's really able to take over the game in Cooper Norad last season for the bunch, 13 points on 42% three-point shooting. He's up to 24 points, 5 boards, and he's been able to shoot in the high 30s from three-point range on very high volume, and I do think that he's going to be able to lead them here, especially with Jake Feigen, who's been a nice scorer for the team over the last few seasons. He's been dealing with a little bit of an injury, but it's a Cornell team that they absolutely love to be able to bomb from 3. They're facing off against a Colgate bunch that has been allowing teams only shoot about 30% from the outside, but that said, they're also just not doing a great job on the glass. It's a Colgate team that as well is not going to force the issue outside the top 300 in terms of turnovers on a per possession basis. So I do think that you get a little bit of slow down games up by total 163, like the under, but willing to lay up to 4.5 here with Cornell. 306-617, 306-618. North Texas plays us to Central Arkansas. Central Arkansas, an underdog of 16 points, 134.5 is the total. I set a total here of a 142. I do like the over. North Texas back outside the top 300 in terms of total possessions per game, but even though Central Arkansas is not playing as fast as they have in the past, they're still a top 125 team in terms of total possessions per game. John Schulman has been able to get this team playing some relatively okay offense. I recognize that they took it on the chin against Arkansas to just kick off their first game against a real power conference team, but that said, you bring back Cameron Hunter from I believe now 3 seasons ago, because he was at Wisconsin last year, dealt with injury 2 years ago, but during that 2022-23 campaign, he was at his sink for the team. 17 points, 5 boards, 4 assists, stealing that per contest, and he's starting to restore some order with this offense. And you've had a few guys that have stuck with the program. You've had Cole McCormick stay with it as 6'6" combo player that last year gave this team double figures. Javion Guy King, he's been with the program for multiple years. He was out the entire 2024-25 campaign after 2 years ago as a freshman. He gave that team 7 points through in their multiple assists per game, so that helps out the Central Arkansas team, one that they do need some help very much with regards to their overall just shooting. They're right now shooting 25.5% from 3. That should ascend. I think that you get some positive regression there. And for this North Texas team, they got completely blitzed when they went out there to the West Coast to face off against St. Mary's, but that's going to happen to a lot of teams, and they bring in Daniel Robinson, whose teams over at Cleveland State always a lot of second chances. Last year, his Cleveland State team was 311th with regards to defensive rebound percentage, so that should present Central Arkansas with some second and third chances. That said, this is a North Texas team that as well has some nice firepower from the outside. Wilbeck London, who comes on over after he began his career over at San Jose State and UCLA, top 75 recruit. He's been able to supply 13 points, 2.5 assists. He's shooting 45% from 3. David Terrell, it's a small sample size, but he's shooting 50% from 3, 10.5 points. He was over at UTEP last season where he generated a steal and a half per contest, and it appears as though North Texas is really going to be forming that identity around being able to generate turnovers and get those fast break buckets, as this is a bunch that right now is in the top 75 in terms of turnovers for us on a per possession basis. They're going to give up those second and third chances. I do think think that that'll help out Central Arkansas with regards to scoring, but I do think that Central Arkansas going to be a little bit sloppy with the ball, as right now they're turning the ball over in that neighborhood about 12 times per contest, but I do think that a Central Arkansas team that's right now well outside the top 275 in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis gives it up here. So I did set my total 142. I like the over, and with North Texas made them a 20-point favorite. I'm willing to lay that number. 306, 619, 306, 620. We've got ourselves a neutral court game here between Incarnate Word and Southern Indiana. This is going to be from Daytona Beach, Florida, and right now the Word is a 7.5 to an 8-point favorite. Total on this game is 151. I did set Incarnate Word as a 6-point favorite, so I'm going to be willing to take the points with Southern Indiana. Southern Indiana's had a tough time getting going on offense. Right now they're outside the top 275 in terms of points scored on a per possession basis, and for Southern Indiana, they're playing very up-tempo right now. They're 12th in the country in terms of total possessions per game. Incarnate Word has been pretty much the opposite. Incarnate Word right now 361st in the country in terms of total possessions per game, but well outside the top 275 in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. So good old situation of something's got to give. Incarnate Word has some pretty efficient offense, by the way. Right now they're shooting as a collective 39.5% from three. Gave Indiana good effort in that second half as well. You've got Davion Bailey, who came on over 2 years ago from Ball State. He's been able to give you 16 points per contest. He does a good job leading the offense. But Taj Stavesky, who was over at Cleveland State last season, he's doing it all. 18 points, 6 boards, 6.5 assists per game, but his team doesn't feel like it has quite as much firepower down low. I like the fact that they bring in Harold Woods. He was a nice go-to scorer over at Northeastern last year with double figures. He's been able to fly above 7.5 points, 6 boards per contest, but I do think that for Southern Indiana, they do find a little bit more consistency with their offense, as they brought in a 16-point per game scorer that was able to lead the way for Bethune-Cookman last year in Trey Thomas, who's been able to give you 14 points per game. Ismail Habib, he was a main facilitator 2 seasons ago over at Portland State. He dealt with injury last year. He's been able to give the team 19 points per game. It is a bunch that is going to have their issues with regards to giving up offensive rebounds. Right now, they're allowing opponents to grab 14.5 offensive rebounds per game. They're well outside the top 10 in college basketball in that regard, but this is a team that I do think has the backcourt to be able to hold in there, and this is an Incarnate Word team that's really not going to be forcing the issue. Southern Indiana's been hurt by the fact that they have turned the ball over 14 times per contest. Got an Incarnate Word team that's outside the top 200 in terms of turnovers forced on a per possession basis, so I think that you get some cleaner offense here. Did set my total at 150. Again, Incarnate Word just plays so slowly that I don't think that you get enough possessions for an over, so like the under and anything of pretty much a 6.5 plus here with Southern Indiana, and we have things up with 306, 621, 306, 622. High point hopes to not be a low point as they play us Illinois, Chicago. UIC is a underdog of 8.5 points. 154 is the total, and set my line at 6.5. I'm going to be willing to take the points with Illinois, Chicago. It's been a little bit of an up and down start to the season for Illinois, Chicago. They actually got a very big test from Chicago State a few days ago, but with this UIC unit, I do think that they do a pretty solid job here, because you do have for Illinois, Chicago, just a nice backcourt that has been able to play with one another over the last few seasons, and having a good facilitator in Ahmad Henderson is a really nice place to start. He was able to give the team last season about like 11.5 points, 2.5 assists per game. He's taken on a little bit more of the onus of being able to roll it out, and is currently shooting 40% from three. Has always been a good free throw shooter, career 88% free throw shooter, and he does a nice job finding a way to be able to get to the free throw line, and then picking up the Towson transfer, Mekhi Lowry, I think really elevates the defense as well. At Towson last year, 5.5 points, 5.5 boards. Not a guy that really bombs it from three at like 6'5", 6'6", but he just does a nice job in terms of his low post play. And then Ante Bijan, he comes over from Little Rock at 6'8". He's got some versatility. He helps his team out on the glass as well, and that was a little bit of a concern for UIC last season. Still is, and UIC was a good three-point shooting defense last year. Right now, they're allowing opponents to shoot 25.5% from three. That should be going northward a little bit, but I do think that they hold in there against a high-point team that they really impressed against Furman to begin the season. I think we're finding out that Furman was maybe a little bit overrated. I personally overrated Furman a little bit, but Cameron Fletcher, he's rock solid. When he was healthy over at Florida State and Xavier, he was always able to give those teams 8+ points per contest at the high major level. He's now been able to give this team 17 points, 8 boards at 6'6". He's able to give you some 3-point shooting, and then you bring in Rob Martin, top scorer over at Southeast Missouri State. Scary Terry Anderson, he was rock solid when he was over at Lamar. He's now in year number 2 of the system after he had a little bit more of an ancillary role last year. 2 years ago, Lamar was that main man with 13 points, 6.5 boards, 2.5 assists per game. So I really do like the backcourt play of this high point team, and it is a high point team that they've been able to do a nice job shooting 36% from three. They themselves have guarded the arc really well. Opponents are shooting less than 27% from the outside against them. Again, I think that both of those teams are doing for a little bit of negative regression there, but it's not a high point team that like really guns it or anything like that, and they've been having a tough time in terms of their offensive rebounding rebounding as well. So I do think that this is going to be a little bit of a limited game in terms of the possessions. High point right now about 163rd in all of college basketball. In terms of total possessions per game, UIC hovering right around about 200. So set a total of 152.5. I like the under, and at 7+, we'll take those points here with UIC, and that'll wrap things up for the Thursday edition of Coast to Coast Hoops, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. A big thanks to Rocco Miller. Does great work over at Bracketeer.org. He joined me in the last segment. If you do like what you're hearing from this fine podcast, Coast to Coast Hoops, you're able to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn. If you have a question, comment, segment idea, whatever you for this podcast, you do have one of two ways we offer those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at gunit_81. Keep in mind, letters EM, they mean does not matter, so per usual, please do send these into the timeline. And the other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. And then from there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. I'm with you guys every single day on this podcast, breaking down every single game, every single day. So I will be back with you once again tomorrow. Thank you.